Senator Cherergei, I will allow you to stand in for Senator Mogeni. The mic is not working. Hello? Senator Cherergei.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the mic, there's a problem with the mic. Yes. It's okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. It's on. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. I rise to petition on behalf of Senator Okongo Mugeni, who is away on parliamentary duties. Honorable senators, the letter has been attached, and a petition to the Senate concerning the mass failure at the Kenya School of Law. As authorized by the Speaker, on behalf of Senator Okongo Mugeni, who is on parliamentary duties, I raised a petition to the Senate concerning the mass exam failure at the Kenya School of Law. We and the citizens of the Republic of Kenya and concerned members of the public regarding learning at the Kenya School of Law draw the attention of the Senate to the following: that for the past few years, students of Kenya School of Law have massively been failing exams at a high percentage, and the number of failures increases each year, thus causing suspicion and the credibility of the exams. Second, that since the transfer of the handling of exams to the Council of Legal Education, the rate of failure has been on high and alarming compared to previous legal regime when Kenya School of Law was in charge of examination. Third, that whenever a student fails, he is forced to receipt or request for remark, which is being charged not less than 15,000 per paper, thus making Council of Legal Education a cash cow, and taking into account that over 95% of the students who sat the exams are involved. Fourth, that the mass failure has caused frustrations and depression to the students who are eager to be admitted to the bar and ready to practice, but they have used all their money and years in resitting the exams. Fifth, that there is no any other effort that has been made to address this issue, or it is not pending in any constitutional body, commission, or any court of law. Wherefore, your humble petitioners pray that the Senate investigates this matter and makes appropriate recommendations thereon with a view to, 1, conducting investigations on the Kenya School of Law on the structures and systems of instructions in place that could be a contribution to the mass failures. Second, conducting investigations on the finances of the Council of Legal Education and Kenya School of Law with a view to outlawing payment of fees for receipts and remarking so as to block the incentive to fail students in masses. Fifth, to initiate
order, members. Let us consult in low tones.
That the Senate to initiate a serious audit of finances at Council of Legal Education and Kenya School of Law that are being collected as a result of mass receipts and remarks. On behalf, that was Elkanah Kitur. This was countersigned and have been authorized by the Speaker by the Senior Counsel, Senator Okongo Mugeni, Senator for Nyamira County. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir.
Okay, honorable senators, order leader of minority. Before I allow comments, let me make a communication. I would like to acknowledge the presence in the Speaker's Gallery this afternoon of visitors St. Mary's Socio-Secondary School, Bungoma County. In our usual tradition of receiving and welcoming visitors to Parliament, I extend a warm welcome to them, and on behalf of the Senate and on my own behalf, wish them a fruitful visit. I thank you. Senator Moses Wetangula.
Mr. Speaker, may I join you and the rest of the House in welcoming the teachers and students from one of our top schools in Bungoma County, St. Mary's Socio, who are visiting the upper house of Parliament, the Senate. Mr. Speaker, Socio Secondary School is one of our leading schools with very strong religious, in brackets, Catholic background. It's a school known for discipline. It's a school known in the past for being outstanding in sports, particularly football. And it's a school that we are all proud of. Equally important, Mr. Speaker, is a school in your neighborhood, being my constituent as well. I want to welcome the students, the teachers, that when you come to this house, you have come to the premier house of Parliament where reason precedes everything. You have come to a house of reason, a house where members debate issues with sobriety, clarity, and patriotism. So as you come here, we look forward to you learning and preparing yourselves for leadership positions in future at the county level, at the national level, and I look forward to some of you succeeding me when I take my sunset from politics. At an appropriate time, I'll come out there to meet you, but feel welcome and feel comfortable to be in the House of Parliament, where your county, Bungoma, is represented by 2 senators, yours truly, and the Speaker.
Thank you so much, my senator. It's true. For honorable senators, that's a school in my neighborhood. It's a walking distance from my home to the school. So I really want to also welcome them to the Senate. Thank you very much. So let's continue with the contribution. Haji Farhia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. First of all, I want to join you and Senator for Bungoma in congratulating St. Mary's Socio for doing well and for visiting the upper house. And that here is where serious business is discussed, Mr. Speaker, as you are aware. Here is where we have very many senior councils, Mr. Speaker. Here is where everything happens for the right reasons and for the people of Kenya, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I also wanted to comment about the statement regarding Kenya School of Law. I mean, the petition regarding Kenya School of Law. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank Senator Omugeni for bringing that petition to this House. Mr. Speaker, the cries of the students of Kenya School of Law is real, Mr. Speaker. You will find, Mr. Speaker, who did very well in their secondary school, their primary school, university. They were A students, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, you will notice that there is, and then when they go to Kenya School of Law, Mr. Speaker, they fail multiple times. So, Mr. Speaker, the question any human being would ask is that real exam or that is an exam that is intended to fail people, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, let me actually even talk about a friend of mine. A friend of mine who is a widow. She brought up her 2 children by herself. She was widowed when she was very young. Mr. Speaker, and one of her children failed 4 times, Mr. Speaker, 4 times. Where is she supposed to get all that? She's the only parent who is taking care of these kids. And even, Mr. Speaker, is like she feels like she is not worth that exam, Mr. Speaker. And she did extremely well in her university, Mr. Speaker, and her secondary school, everywhere. She's from Nairobi University, Mr. Speaker. And then you ask yourself, then what is it that they test, Mr. Speaker? So I think, Mr. Speaker, this House needs to do a thorough and diligent investigation on what really goes on, including some of the lawyers reading the script of those students to actually verify that the real exam is being marked or people are being failed intentionally, Mr. Speaker. Actually, even my profession, CPA, used to be the same, Mr. Speaker, until half of Kenyans started doing ACCA, and then they realized, okay, we need to mark these papers. So, Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, for you to be admitted to the bar in Kenya, you need to go through Kenya School of Law and pass that exam, Mr. Speaker. So those people don't have those options. I think whichever committee handles that, we need to go further than that and identify, especially people who have failed more than 2 times. Let them do sample checking by senior lawyers and competent lawyers that we have in this house, whether their answers met the requirement. And if there is an accounting paper, I am ready to mark some of those ones that is failing people, because at least I can mark an accounting paper. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Agnes Zani.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Let me start by wishing my brothers and sisters, Muslims, an Eid Mubarak, fasting, and that God's graces from Allah land on them. Secondly, to welcome the students from St. Mary's School, Mr. Speaker, the school near your neighborhood and also in Senator Wetangula's county. And first to comment about how smart they are and how smart they look. And we've also heard about how smart they are even in their academic work. So we wish that this afternoon that they can learn a lot about what happens in the Senate, and that when they go back into their counties to realize that they can begin to contribute in their counties early enough. They don't have to wait for very long. Once they are seized of the issues in the counties, for example, issues to ensure that there are enough resources in the counties, the human resources issues, issues like wage bills, issues like on-source revenue, and how to address them. You can begin within your own schools having discussions about how you can make Bungoma continue to be a great county. Number 2, Mr. Speaker, this whole issue about the petition is a bit worrying, because I don't think we want also to institutionalize that people pass because they have to pass. I think there seems to be a disconnect, because these people who go to this, which is a professional organization and professional body, have passed their law regular courses. That means they have done regular courses, they've been tested for this. When they go for the professional exam, something goes wrong. So either there's a disconnect with the way they've been trained and what they've been learning, and when they go to do the professional exam, then they are being asked completely different things. There's need to audit to find out exactly what might the situation be. Is it very high-pitched, and therefore maybe what they learn from the universities is not as high-pitched as what they're being tested professionally? What are the professional bodies adding in terms of content in the content of the university and the courses that they're doing in the university? And how can that be addressed? And I see that from this petition from Senator Omogeni, all these issues have been raised. I think, Mr. Speaker, it's important that this petition is seized in the Senate, and I'm sure the committee that it will go to will be able to look at the details of this. Yes, there is the issue of money. And most of these exams are very, very expensive. But I also know in many other countries, sometimes professional exams take quite a bit of time before you're able to get there. Again, we must remember that it is the link before you actually practice professionally. And in certain areas, for example, like medicine, the implication of not being able to get the certification from the professional body is very, very serious. Because, for example, in medicine, you're going to handle human beings. And if you put in the wrong medicine, that person will die. So it could be that they're high-pitched, maybe for a particular reason, but again, they need to explain this so that as students begin their courses, they can be rightfully guided. Probably most of the courses they've done, they have been very theoretical, and now they have to switch to the practical. Maybe this has to do with the educational system right through from nursery up to the point where they are. So I think this petition, Mr. Speaker, gives us a good position and a good situation and a good chance to seize, to understand what is happening, and maybe as they do that, and with the stakeholders, maybe they can begin to address what happens also in other sectors. Senator Faria, she contributed about the CPA, intimated that later on this seemed to have been corrected. How did they go about it? But I think it's important to have the right balance so that we get the right professionals for the different professions that are there in this country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Isaac Mwaura.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I also rise to welcome the students from Bungoma County. And just to say that Bungoma County is a very good county. I was there recently in Misihu, and I really enjoyed the serene environment. And you know, this Bungoma County is very well known for chicken, ingoho. It's very, huge ingoho. I mean, you eat there with obusuba. And also, Mr. Speaker, if you add that with njugu karanga, life can actually be quite okay. Mr. Speaker, I also want to say that the petition around the Kenya School of Law, I have had people who have spoken to me in private that they have been failed by lecturers because some of them are actually demanding that they should have affairs with them or relationships with them. So sometimes when you see somebody failing so many times, it may not necessarily be because out of lack of academic acumen. It could just be other issues. So that whole scenario needs to be interrogated. And also, the cartel-like behavior of senior lawyers, for example, who may actually not want to see younger, more ebullient, vibrant, lawyers to occupy that same advocates to occupy that space, I think it's something that also needs to be interrogated. And of course, there is a whole issue of looking at also not just academic, passes, because there are people who may have proper and very good lawyer skills, so that then we need to look at how is it that these courses are being administered and what exactly is being looked out for. So, Mr. Speaker, I rise to support.
Senator Olekina Ledam.
Mr. Speaker, sir, thank you. I rise to support the petition, but from the onset, I'd like to welcome the students from Bungoma and encourage them to continue visiting the Senate and also the other House of Parliament so that they can be able to aspire to be here in future. Mr. Speaker, sir, on the issue of the petition, I'm a little bit baffled, and my take is going to be completely different. Failing an exam does not mean it's the end of the world for you. Mr. Speaker, sir, it will be ridiculous for us to encourage failure, because when you look at the panel that marks the exam from the Council of Legal Education, it is made up of professional lawyers. It is made up of people from the state office, from the DPP, and also from the Council of Legal Education. There's a big problem here, Mr. Speaker, sir. And this came in a few years ago when people were talking about taking away the mandate of the Kenya School of Law and giving it to private institutions so that they can be, it can spread such that any person can go to, let's say, Nairobi University, attend a law school in Nairobi University, and then go to a similar arrangement like the Kenya School of Law, and then go out and practice. What we need to look at when we are looking at this petition when they are brought into this House, Mr. Speaker, sir, is how true. If it is an issue of money, they are talking about 15,000 shillings here being paid to recite an exam. How was that student performing when he or she was at Nairobi University or any other university in this country before they went to the Kenya School of Law? Because I personally feel that there has to be a different entity that sets out exams. If the petitioners are arguing that since the time when now the exams are being set up by the Council of Legal Education, that is when the exams, students started failing, then we have to figure out, were the exams which were being placed by the Kenya School of Law, were they accurate and were there any favorism? I think it is important because even when we start exams, when we're in college and we start our exams, even KCPE in high school, that exam is not set up by the same school that you attend to. There is an entity that is tasked with putting up that exam. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, we have to be careful. I know that there are issues the petitioners are raising here in terms of auditing the finances. That is the work of the Auditor General. And I'm aware that there is an audit being carried out after the former director of Kenya School of Law, Professor P.L.O. Lumumba, left, and the new director came in place. They invited them to carry out a forensic audit of the finances. So this, we have to separate the two. Are the students failing because they did not prepare, or are they failing because there is some sort of like a cartel movement that want to be responsible for who comes out and practice? So we have to interrogate this. And Mr. Speaker, sir, I would urge that the committee that you'll task with this, which is a legal committee, for them to look at those. Let them audit the process of carrying out these exams. Is that process fair? Is it sound? Or is it better if it is being carried out by the Kenya School of Law? Mr. Speaker, sir, I support.
Senator Lagata Christopher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir, for also allowing me this opportunity to give my input, and also as the Chair Education, welcome the students who are seated in the gallery. And I want to say, Mr. Speaker, sir, that it is really alarming that in a professional body, professional institution, not necessarily deep academic institution, can realize mass failure when it comes to their exams. And I want to say that students can fail examination. First, maybe as Senator Olendama was saying, when it comes to poor preparation for the students, this is actually something to blame on the lecturers. Number two, students can fail because also their study habits. And I want to say this: when I was a lecturer in university, and I realized that most of our students today have got the poorest study habits. They no longer engage themselves into the proper habits or good habits for studying. Students also can fail because of, I want to disagree a bit with the idea that some lecturers of such a high caliber can demand some exchange for marks by compromising their moral standards. But that one is not so rampant, Mr. Speaker.
Order members. Let's
allow me to explain myself, senators.
Okay.
It can contribute, but not something so rampant as such. We used to get such cases in university, but not very much something to contribute to mass failures. Because if you see the failures also, among those who are failing are male students. They are male students. So who can demand what from a male student? So I want to say, the lady lecturers. Okay, I want to say, students also can fail because of syllabus must be checked, Mr. Speaker. Could be they're operating on a syllabus that is, maybe that requires to be revised. And I want to say that surely the mass failure in the School of Law is alarming. And I would like to urge the committee concerned to do thorough investigation so that real issues affecting this particular very important institution can be realized and addressed accordingly and forever. So I want to say I support this particular petition, and I want to really say we must investigate so that our students may not suffer unnecessarily. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, honorable senators, as we proceed, I also want to acknowledge the presence in the public gallery this afternoon of visiting students and teachers from Maasai Girls Secondary School, Narok County. In our usual tradition of receiving and welcoming visitors to Parliament, I extend a warm welcome to them, and on behalf of the Senate and on my own behalf, wish them a fruitful visit. I thank you. Senator Wetangula.
Mr. Speaker, as I rise to contribute to the petition, I want to join you in welcoming students from Maasai Girls in Narok and encourage them to learn whatever they can from this upper house. We, as the Senate, is a house of reason, a house of reform, of people who engage in serious debate, as you will see this afternoon. Welcome and feel happy. Mr. Speaker, this petition is very important. It's important, Mr. Speaker, because when an institution, particularly a post-university institution, records mass failures, it is cause for worry. The Kenya School of Law, Mr. Speaker, has had a long history starting from the days of Tutor General, coming down to Kulundu Bitonye, PLO Lumumba, and the current principal. Mr. Speaker, during our time, you could get 1 or 2 students being referred to sit a supplementary paper because strictly what is taught at the School of Law is not hard stuff. It's etiquette. How to run a law firm, how to keep accounts for your clients, how to deal with fellow lawyers in professional undertakings, how to appear before courts with decorum, how to disagree with your colleagues without being boisterous, and so on and so forth. So when you record a mass failure in a situation such as this, Mr. Speaker, it raises a lot of questions. It raises a lot of questions because, Mr. Speaker, I hope the School of Law, like the University of Nairobi, ADD. I remember when we were in Form 2, Form 3, James Orengo here, then a student leader, led a revolt at the University of Nairobi because there was a white man at ADD who used to make sure that Africans cannot pass exams to become architects. And that revolt revolutionized the change at ADD, brought in African lecturers, and we started having African architects who do a very good job. So the committee that I believe will be chaired by Senator Cherargei himself, who presented the petition, must not subject themselves to issues of financial audits because those are not academic. Financial audits should be done by the Auditor General if he is too busy to hire an audit firm to do it. Let them look at the academics that go on at the School of Law and why we are recording failures and why we are having students coming in, and many of us, including myself, are routinely visited by students looking for fees to go and pay to sit for supplementary exams when they had already paid fees for original exams. Mr. Speaker, the committee should also look at the possibility that with all these parallel programs, sometimes we are having also substandard admissions to faculties. And sometimes those substandard admissions also run through the entire system to a level where students may not be able to undertake and overcome simple exams. We don't want to see a situation, Mr. Speaker, where children are frustrated simply because lecturers are either being lazy or are being mischievous or are being malicious. This is not the way to go. And I think this petition should be able to help. More important, and lastly, Mr. Speaker, is the continuing desire to standardize professional training. I've been hearing of setting up similar institutions all over the country. We don't have too many of the lawyers graduating from universities. And if we can maintain a standard training by an expanded School of Law with a proper curriculum and proper teachers, we will be able to produce better lawyers than spreading ourselves too thin and having conflicting qualifications coming from different centers of institutions, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Senator Naomi Gilo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir, for allowing me to add my voice to this petition against Kenya School of Law, as I also congratulate the Senator Cherargei, who is the chair of legal committee and who has brought this petition to the House. Mr. Speaker, why I support this is because of the challenges that our young people have faced and have gone through and continue going through. Many parents, Mr. Speaker, have struggled a lot even to raise fees for their children and brought them to this level in education. And when you see only, 18% of students go through the examination, it is very devastating. It is devastating both to the parents and also to the students themselves. Mr. Speaker, we have all sat for exams, and we know the anxiety that is there when you sit for your exams, and it is bad when you know that you have done your best, and at the end of the day, you are just there to fail. And Mr. Speaker, many of us have shared the experience of how students have shared with them the challenges they have gone through, and how, you know, they are being frustrated in the school. Mr. Speaker, it is very sad when you sit for an exam and again to resit for the same exam or to redo the whole thing, it takes you 5 more years. And you know, your years go until you get old in the school, and depression, which many of us are complaining about in our society today. Many young people are committing suicide because they are not seeing any light at the end of the tunnel. They struggle a lot, they invest a lot, they study hard, they deny themselves everything. And at the end of the day, they don't get that they have expected. Mr. Speaker, it is high time for us as Senate to stand up and talk for these young people, and also urge the committee to do and to give this particular petition the attention it deserves, so that we can get to know the reasons behind the mass failure. We do not want to just depend on the rumors that we have heard. If it is intentional, then this House again will demand further actions, because we want full compensation. The years of our students have been wasted, the families, the parents are frustrated, and we want them to be to understand why this has happened. Mr. Speaker, we want to urge the committee to keenly look into the matter and furnish this House with full information as to why many students have failed. And if there is anything that we can do, let us do it as soon as possible. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Before I give an opportunity to the leader of minority, I know the Senator Narok is eager to welcome students from Narok. Senator Ledama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise to welcome the students from Masai Girls Secondary School to this great house. Mr. Speaker, sir, last Saturday, we hosted the 56th Madaraka Day celebration in Narok, and the students in the school played a big role, and I'm quite happy that they came here today so that they can be able to see how we interact issues, how we debate on matters, and I want to encourage them to be able to pick ideas from each and every senator here who speaks. If you listen carefully, you will understand that we all speak differently. We have different ideas on how we see things. I think the petition that we're talking about, those are the things that come here. And I hope that when you go back to Narok, you can be able to aspire to be in this house so that you can be able to bring in change. Because, Mr. Speaker, sir, the future of this country depends on these young girls. And the school is such a great school. I've got a lot of good stories when I was growing up. It was directly opposite Narok Boys High School where I went to school, but those are for another day. And I want to welcome you and also remind you that I will be visiting you with, hopefully, a lot of these senators, including the Speaker. So welcome to the Senate and enjoy your time here.
I can see there's a lot of interest, and I see many, many lawyers lined up. So I will want to limit the time to about 3 minutes. Let me start with the leader of minority, Senator James Orengo.
Mr. Speaker, let me also join the Senate in welcoming the students from Bungoma. Bungoma is special in many ways because the Speaker comes from Bungoma, and this distinguished Senator Moses Wetangula also comes from Bungoma. They have seen you in action, and I think they will go back knowing that Bungoma is playing a very important role in the Senate. The only thing you should know that the senator who occupies the position of the chair of the presiding officer in the Senate has no right to vote, but he can discipline us when we go wrong. Now, for the students coming from Narok, also I wish to welcome you, join the rest of the senators to welcome you. And remember the Saturday when we were in Narok, and some of us left there feeling very good because there are some things which are not said, but you can see for yourself where that county stands. And I think anytime I'm invited to Narok, I'll go back to Narok because it is a stronghold of the formation I support. Mr. Speaker, coming about this petition, this is a very important petition actually. Mr. Speaker, there was a time when the country was so short of advocates that there was a special course at the Kenya School of Law which you only needed to go to the Kenya School of Law for 1 year. And that was enough for you to train as a lawyer and be admitted at the bar. In fact, some of the very prominent lawyers that came out during that period rose to the position of Chief Justice. Justice Chunga had no university degree when he became a lawyer. He just went to the law school for 1 year. Justice Kasanga Mulwa, Paul Muite, just for 1 year, they were just being prepared to practice law. And I wonder why a person who has graduated with first class at the University of Nairobi or in the University of Dar es Salaam or Makerere or other universities could spend 3 years or 2 years trying to qualify to become a lawyer, a practicing lawyer. That means that you can be able to go to the University of Nairobi, spend 3 years, get your degree, first class honors, but spend 5 years trying to look for a diploma from the Kenya School of Law. So, Mr. Speaker, there's certainly something that should be inquired into. As pointed out by Honorable Wetangula, I had the experience of leading students at the University of Nairobi when there was mass failure in the Faculty of Architecture and Design. And that profession was completely white. They didn't want any African to qualify, not even an Indian, to qualify as an architect. And people were being failed and referred. Now, the other thing that I must point out, and Mr. Speaker, you said we should only spend 3 minutes, to complicate the situation of the students who actually go through the Kenya School of Law is if you are lucky to pass the exams, because I'm saying lucky because sometimes you meet the grades, but you're made not to pass. You are disqualified through this process of mass failure. But to be admitted, again, you have another hurdle with the judiciary, waiting for the Chief Justice when he's available. And that can take another 2 or 3 years. The end result of this, there's a lot of people who are now deciding not to pursue law as a calling because you spend more than 7 years trying to qualify to be a practicing lawyer. That is longer than even the period doctors take and the architects take. So I support Senator Omugeni for bringing this petition, and I think the legal committee should look at it deeply and try and come up with solutions. And I hope that the judiciary will play its role and the Council of Legal Education will look into this so that the young people who desire to be lawyers have an opportunity to become lawyers without unnecessary hurdles. Mr. Speaker, I practice law and I learn a lot from young lawyers. Even there are some lawyers who are qualified last year. They step into a courtroom. If you listen to them keenly, you see signs of them becoming great lawyers. The law that we practice, a lot of it is not learned in the classroom, is learned in the courtroom, practicing law. So I support this petition. Thank you.
Senator Kilonzo Mutula Jr.
Thank you, Speaker. I support the petition. Mr. Speaker, we are waiting for our chair to be admitted to the bar. This gentleman. Because there's a certain privilege that comes with holding a number like mine, 4530. Our chair needs to have a number. And that number will come when they recognize that the chair is already trained at the university. Going to the School of Law for us was fun. I learned the word autochthonous from the chairman of Gormaya, who is an expert in conveyancing, Ambrose Rachier. I know very few people who can beat him in conveyancing. People like Senator Orengo should be a lecturer at the School of Law, because the School of Law is not supposed to be a place where people fail exams. They're supposed to be trained. I was told a story.
Members, let's consult in law tones. Senator Junior is making a very important point.
I was told a story of the subject professional ethics. Students used to leave the School of Law. This I was told by my late father. They used to leave the School of Law, go to Mombasa, and the principal, you just look at them. And by the time they come back, Mr. Speaker, they could either have failed or passed professional ethics. So therefore, Mr. Speaker, the idea of failing students, the idea of charging them exorbitant fees, Kenya is the only country that does not invest in the legal profession. There should be deliberate funding, Mr. Speaker, in training good lawyers. 6,000 lawyers are not enough for this country in a population of over 40 million Kenyans. And Mr. Speaker, a lot of people who have trained in law, whether in Russia or other places, are now opting, Mr. Speaker, to skip the School of Law. Charles Njonjo, to date, collects a practicing certificate. To date. Because it's a privilege to have a practicing certificate hanging by your office and somewhere. So I look forward to Senator Cherargei wearing a wig and a gown and reading the oath of office as an advocate. Thank you.
Leader of Majority.
This investigation is going to be done to establish the mass failure at the School of Law. I think we should do more. The Speaker, I don't agree. I don't agree with this situation that there will be only one institution of learning that will train lawyers for pre-bar exam. And the Speaker, I also don't agree that that institution should be centralized somewhere in Karen. The Speaker, it's punitive. I had made this suggestion when I was still teaching at the university, that, Mr. Speaker, we must turn the legal profession, the bar exam, to be like the New York bar exam, the London bar exam, where, Mr. Speaker, you just prepare the exam just like CPA do. The person who sets the exam and examines students is different. And then the training or the preparation for bar is also different, Mr. Speaker. If you go to US, once you register for bar exam, it does not matter where you go and do the training. You can go to any institution, you can buy your pre-bar books, you can be trained and coached by 2-3 people. In any case, you already have your law degree. The only remaining thing is for you to go and sit for the exam. And the exam should be set independently and marked independently, where you do not know the students, you don't interact with the students personally, personal favors are not going to be applied or being determined. Mr. Speaker, when what we called in our days parallel program, I'll tell you a small story because it's relevant for this house. Mr. Speaker, when the parallel program was established at the university, and particularly University of Nairobi, that was the time I was a student. Mr. Speaker, the sole vice chair at that time was Senator Kangata, and I wish he was here. And so he led a mandamano, and Senator Mutula Kilonzo should hear this story because he was the lawyer. Mr. Speaker, it was at that time that the protests were done, led by Senator Kangata, and the chairman was Honorable Sankok, who is in National Assembly. And this one was the vice chair. Then we had others, Barakambara, Omondi, who is now in private issues and so forth. The Speaker, that protest was to the extent, if you can add me 3 minutes only 3 minutes. This is a very important thing, Mr. Speaker, to go on record. When the protest was that time that legal training, our complaint was that the legal training was going to be compromised because of mass training that does not regulate the number of people who come to the legal profession. Of course, you know, we did mandamano, my class survived, we didn't have to do what they had forced at that point in time, but ultimately, we have so many lawyers across the country. In fact, the complaint of the senior lawyers at the moment is that the imbalance at the LSK is between the behavior of the young lawyers vis-a-vis the behavior of the older lawyers. And it's a problem that we are grappling with as we move on. Mr. Speaker, at the School of Law, the failures, there is a mass failure at the School of Law. Mr. Speaker, those students are depressed because somebody trained at Mombasa campus, University of Nairobi, or Kisumu campus, or Eldoret Moi University, they come and they are forced to go to school in Karen, where transport is complicated, getting housing is difficult, Mr. Speaker. Most of those students, for the first time, they come to Nairobi, and they're expected to pay over 200,000 to go to School of Law. I think, Mr. Speaker, as we look into this petition, this House should not just come back, and I'm requesting the committee led by my former student, Senator Cherargei, who is also a victim of the same process because he's still at the Kenya School of Law, Mr. Speaker, is that I would like when they come back, they should not come back, Mr. Speaker. As we know, we have many students here of law. We have Senator Methika Linturi, who just finished his degree at the University of Nairobi, is going to School of Law. We have Senator Kinyua, who is now a third year at the University of Nairobi. So, Mr. Speaker, we have people here who have direct interest in this subject matter. I am suggesting that the committee, they don't just come back with an answer, general answer to the petition. I am suggesting that they come back with a draft amendment to the Kenya School of Law Act, Kenya Council for Legal Education Act, so that, Mr. Speaker, we can liberalize pre-bar exam training, so that if you finish your degree at the University of Nairobi, and the University of Nairobi, while offering law degree, can also teach for the bar exam. They can prepare you for the bar exam. You just finish there and register to go and do the bar exam. If you pass, that is it. You don't need to double forcing students to go and redo courses like conveyancing, criminal procedure, and so forth at the School of Law, things that they would have done at the university to do both for the exam and prepare for the pre-bar. Mr. Speaker, I beg to support.
I'll only allow one, a non-lawyer, Senator Musurve, and Senator Borgisho. Then we.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for this opportunity. And I would like to also take this opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to also join you in welcoming the students in the House from Bungoma and Narok. And Mr. Speaker, I want to say that last week I was in Bungoma, and I also passed through the Lusaka Road, and you did a commendable job. And Mr. Speaker, people are nostalgic in Bungoma concerning your work. Mr. Speaker, I now want to go to the statement of the day. And I want to say, Mr. Speaker, that I strongly support this statement. One, petition, sorry, thank you. I would like to support this petition. And the reason why I want to support this petition, Mr. Speaker, is because I was a lecturer at the university, and at the time I was a lecturer at the university, Mr. Speaker, the students who are doing law were really, really failing compared to other subjects and other courses. And I want to say, Mr. Speaker, at the university, in fact, there is no reason why a student should fail a university exam. In fact, it is one of the easiest exams to pass. And I want to say, Mr. Speaker, students of law go through moments that are really, really psychologically torturing. One, I remember a parent complaining to me at one point that his son was in the School of Law, and Mr. Speaker, he was helpless, he was talking to himself, he was so frustrated because of the exams. He kept reading, but when it came to doing exams, something small would just make sure that he was taken back to repeat the exam. Mr. Speaker, I want to really agree with some senators who are saying here that sometimes lecturers sometimes become sadists. Some, I'm talking of some. And it is unfortunate that lecturers can become sadists and just want a few students in the law institution. Mr. Speaker, I want to say that there is need for the exam to be objective. The exam that students do at the Kenya School of Law should be exams that they've actually been prepared to do. Because when students are in their first year up to fourth year, if a student has a first class or has a second class, then there's no reason why the student should not pass the exam at the Kenya School of Law. And I want to actually agree with the majority leader. There's a statement he has made that there's need for universities to prepare their students, law students, for the pre-bar exam and the bar exams. That preparation is very important because they can just go to, for the exam and pass because they'll have been prepared. So there's need also for universities to ensure that there is a unit within the university course that is preparing students specifically for the pre-bar exams and the bar exams. Mr. Speaker, I support this petition, and there's need for us to interrogate it. Thank you.
Senator Bogisho.
Thank you very much, Speaker, and I stand to support the petition by the Senior Counsel, Omogeni, and brought here by Honorable Cherargei. Speaker, I would like to agree that the lawyers in the House know exactly what to do, apparently, Mr. Speaker. However, as a non-lawyer who is observing from a distance, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to also help put the things in a certain perspective, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, generally, we have lost certain things in our educational system, and we must not blame these things on exams. We must track back to where we lost our interest in reading, our interest in literature, in religion, in studying, Mr. Speaker. There is a situation where everybody now, and I think this again may be, Mr. Speaker, an indictment on the whole training of lawyers. Mr. Speaker, today, every university opens their gates to anybody to study law. Anybody, even those who failed chemistry, who failed what, they come out to study law. And Mr. Speaker, there are certain things that you can do, certain things you cannot do. Some of us are picking up law when we're already 56 or 60 years old, and we try to study them. We might fail exams, and then it's mass failure. But further than that, Mr. Speaker, further than that, we have complained about people cheating.
What is your point of order, Senator Rose Nyamunga?
But it is a point of information, because this afternoon I've listened to most of the members contributing to this petition. But I don't think they are contributing from a point of knowledge. The University of Nairobi, in one class, they have over 300 students, compared to the latter days when a class would be only 40. So we cannot sit here and debate about things that we don't even understand. The students who are going to the School of Law, as far as I'm concerned, and I'm talking from a point of knowledge, they don't have enough knowledge. And we are just not going to pass students for the sake of students. It is important that we check and find out why there is this mass failure. It's good to know the root cause, because debating to make people professionals doesn't make sense. That's my point of order, Mr. Speaker.
This point of information.
Of information, sorry.
Senator.
Mr. Speaker, my time has been, of course, taken by that information, which is a way of debating. Mr. Speaker, I am only saying this, that the lawyers who have an interest in the School of Law, Mr. Speaker, must go back to making law a desired profession, making the studies of law, which are required at all levels, people to study, Mr. Speaker. And then if people, Mr. Speaker, if a lot of young people cheated in the exams, as has been proved, they got A's, and those are the A's which went to School of Law. Mr. Speaker, how do you then, we must now begin to be serious about selecting. I just want to conclude by saying, as the Bible says, many are called, but few are chosen. Mr. Speaker, not everybody can practice law. They can pass exams at the university. Not everybody can be good in practicing. Thank you very much, guys.
Okay, because of pleading so much, I'll give two senators, Senator Ochila Yako and Wambua Enoch. Not Wambua, Kabaka, sorry, Kabaka Boniface.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, order members and the whip, 2 minutes each, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am admission number 2914, so I have personally gone through this process, and this process is alarming. Mr. Speaker, when the results are negative in any school, some people think that the students are the ones who do not know what they are doing. What about the teacher? Could it be the teacher who does not know how to teach? Could it be the teacher who has malice, the teacher who has designed a situation that causes mass failure? So this is a matter that is important, and this is a matter that requires investigation. Mr. Speaker, while studying for masters many years ago at the University of Nairobi, there was a particular lecturer that taught my class, and that was the class that we were with Senator Fatuma Dulo and also Senior Counsel Murgor. Now in that class, Mr. Speaker, there was a particular lecturer who said that we'll not pass the exams. And when the exam came, out of 37 of us who were doing masters, only 3 were able to pass that unit. We petitioned the then Vice Chancellor, who is the Minister for Education, and he brought a different teacher. And when the same exam was set, all of us passed. Now that tells you that there could be sadistic fellas whose agenda is to cause people to fail. The objective of exam is not to have people fail. It is also telling on the teachers that your students fail en masse. So my colleague, Senator Pogisho, who says that only few are called, we are talking of mass failure. We are not talking of a few number. We are talking of a large number, and this is something that needs to be talked about. Some of the people who are failing are even people who have PhDs. So that is a problem, Mr. Speaker. Because of constraint of time, I support this petition, and I will continue doing so.
Senator Kabaka.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir, for giving me this opportunity also to contribute. Mine will be very short. I want to cite a bit of our experience at the School of Law. Like it's been said, during our time after Nairobi University of Nairobi, we used to be allowed, thank you for correction, there is only the University of Nairobi, thank you. At our time, because we were very well prepared, we were even allowed to go and sit for the exam in advance at the School of Law along Gong Road. I remember our time, we had very nice lecturers who are professionals, practitioners, like Mutula Kilonzo, senior, who taught us professional ethics and etiquette. He's the only man at our time, yes, he's the only man or the lecturer at the time who did not receive his salary. His salary used to go to the best student in that paper of professional ethics and etiquette. That was Mutula. And of course, as he was in his own style, he never used to wear same suit. He could come wearing red suits, at the same time drive a red Mercedes. The following day would be a different color. That was a flamboyant man. I wish also to come from the point of information that there could be a problem with the type of lecturers. Some who could be sadistics, if I may say, because I don't understand how a lecturer can fail students, en masse, year in, year out, and you expect him also to teach there. I think some of the points of reference which this team committee, which we'll have to look into, is to interrogate with a lot of keenness to those specific lecturers who are failing students en masse. Wow. Mr. Speaker, sir, if I may get an extra.
Your time is up, Senator.
Thank you.
Kabaka. Senator Susan Kihika.
Thank you, Speaker. I also rise to support the petition by Senior Counsel, the Senator from Kisii. Nyamira, I'm sorry, from Nyamira. And Omogeni. And Speaker, my contribution really is maybe to add to what one of the other speakers have said about probably separating the process, as far as the process, making every stage of it independent. I have sat for the bar in the state of Texas in the US, and what really happens is, do I say? No, I'm kidding. And what really happens, Mr. Speaker, is that when you go to law school, there are very many different law schools. And when you go to law school, you go through the process, which is generally 3 years. But after law school, then different organizations do law school, or what we call the LSAT preparation. That's preparing you for the tests. And that's completely independent, and you shop around for them and get the best and get them to prepare the students. And then you go to a hall where the exam has been set by totally different people and also marked by different people, so that that would take away that issue of saying that the lecturers are passing the students whom they've gotten favors from, or whatever those arguments are. Or if maybe when all this is so connected, there could be the issue of they are failing them, because then they'll turn around again and pay more fees to sit the exams again. And it's a continuous process, which messes up the students. It messes them up as far as time, as far as resources, and even maybe their self-esteem. But I would also wonder and question, maybe are we also admitting students to law school who are not up to par? Are we also having lecturers who are probably not very focused or very good in the profession and shouldn't be holding those professions? Because it doesn't make sense when you have a pass rate or a failure rate, actually, that is so incredibly high. There must be a problem somewhere. So I would also urge, as the committee looks into that, maybe look into whether we can have different bodies setting the exams, different body marking the exam, as well as not having everybody just come to Nairobi to do those exams, but have the same exam, but maybe be devolved around the country so that you don't have the additional burden. So I support the petition. Thank you.
Senator Shionga, I saw you don't look very happy. I give you 2 minutes to conclude.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Indeed, you read my mind. I was not happy. I came to Lopi, but anyway. So the 2 minutes is that, no, I'm not wasting my time, of course. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand to support the petition. And I say that Senator Mugeni, who came up with this petition, together with Senator Cherereke, they have done a very good job to bring this petition. Mr. Speaker, if you look at students who are starting in Kenya School of Law, most of them are depressed. And they are only depressed when it comes to the time of examination. But during the other learning, the student life is very easygoing. Mr. Speaker, if you see the mass failure in this particular institute, it is not impressive, not only to the Kenya School of Law, not only to the students, but to the country as a whole. It is then the concern of us as citizens of Kenya to come and discuss here. It is not a waste of time. Mr. Speaker, it is not only generating more poverty to these children, but even depression. You look at where this Kenya School of Law, as my colleagues have said, it's built in Karen. How many students can afford to stay in Karen from where they stay? If you are staying in Mombasa, or you are starting in Mombasa previously, if you are starting in another part of Kenya, and you are brought to Kenya School of Law, near where you stay, not you, but near where you stay. So you find yourself, you are living in a high-class level, whereby even a room only, you cannot afford to rent. And somebody then fails you 6 times, probably 6 years. What does that spell to any other student? I pity this student, and my recommendation is that I be a friend to that committee that is going to handle this, so that I can contribute more to that particular petition, and we come forward with the best solution that will help this student. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Wambua, you have insisted to conclude so that we move on.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will be very brief. Mr. Speaker, I also take this opportunity to support the petition by Senator Omogeni. As Speaker, I will say three things. One, that the mass failure at the Kenya School of Law is not an issue that should be just blamed on students. When students fail and fail yet again, then there's reason to question the teacher. So the failure, the mass failure, is mass failure both for the students and their lecturers, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the legal profession, when I was growing up, used to be one of the most prestigious professions, where only the best in academics would be admitted to pursue a degree in law. The Speaker, it is time that even as the committee looks into this petition, to rethink this Module 2 program, the so-called parallel degree programs. What courses should we enroll students for parallel programs, and what courses should we not? The Speaker, of late, without casting aspersions on anyone, it is becoming increasingly difficult to even get lecturers of law in universities to write comprehensible legal opinions. The other day, Mr. Speaker, I read what I would call the most disturbing ruling from the highest court in the land, where judges would sit and agree that a person does not have degree papers, but he behaves and conducts himself like a graduate. The Speaker, if these are the tendencies then that we are taking to the Kenya School of Law, there's reason then for our students to fail. Lastly, Mr. Speaker, the use of failures in the Kenya School of Law as a source of revenue for universities, charging 15,000 shillings for an exam paper. The Speaker, that is too extreme. The Speaker, I support.
Okay, Honorable Senators, pursuant to Standing Order 2321, the petition stands committed to the Standing Committee on Justice, Legal Affairs, and Human Rights. In terms of Standing Order 232, the committee is required in not more than 60 days from the time of reading the prayer to respond to the petitioner by way of a report addressed to the petitioner and laid on the table of the Senate. I thank you. Next order.
Order number 5, papers. Order number 6, notices of motion. Order number 7, statements.
Senator Kajwang.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise pursuant to Standing Order 47.1 to make a statement on illegal concessions of Lake Victoria to foreign investors for commercial cage aquaculture. Mr. Speaker, as we speak, fishermen in Suba have been holding peaceful demonstrations for the last 2 weeks to protest against what they call an illegal grabbing of the lake by a foreign investor who has been granted a 315-acre concession covering both the lake and dry land. Further, Mr. Speaker, the fishermen of Suba are demanding access to their traditional fishing grounds, preservation of fish breeding grounds, as well as reopening of traditional transport routes that have been blocked by this investor. Just last week, Mr. Speaker, on Thursday, the 30th of May 2019, one fisherman lost his life in the course of peaceful protests against this alleged grabbing of the lake. And Mr. Speaker, I pray that you join me in sending my condolences to the family of Clinton Ouma, who lost his life last Thursday when policemen lobbed a tear gas canister at his boat and he had to dive in the water to save himself, and unfortunately, he lost his life. Mr. Speaker, allow me to give a very brief background to this problem. In 2016, Parliament passed the Fisheries Management and Development Bill, which was thereafter enacted by the President. Among other objectives, the Act sought to protect, manage, use, and develop aquatic resources in an ecologically and economically sustainable manner. In addition, Mr. Speaker, the Act made provisions for establishment and regulation of commercial aquaculture in the country and gave the Cabinet Secretary for Agriculture the power to develop regulations for the sector. 3 years down the line, none of the objectives of the Act appear to have been achieved. The Cabinet Secretary is yet to bring to Parliament any regulation for this sector. Agencies mandated to implement the Act, like the Kenya Fisheries Service and the Kenya Fish Marketing Authority, are yet to be operationalized. And Mr. Speaker, these two agencies are currently operating with acting directors and acting officers. As a result, the aquaculture sector continues to operate in a Wild West kind of chaos. As a region that has previously borne the brunt of political and economic marginalization, the fisherfolk of Lake Victoria would naturally assume that this delay and lethargy in implementation of the Fisheries Management Act would be a well-calculated strategy of continued economic sabotage. Mr. Speaker, let me go back to the problem in Suba. In Kaksingri West Ward, Suba North Constituency, Homa Bay County, one foreign investor has been allocated approximately 216 acres of lake water, in addition to 99 acres of dry land, bringing it to a total of 315 acres. Whereas this investment has provided employment and increased the output of fish from the lake, it has introduced serious tensions that have already resulted in the loss of one life. Mr. Speaker, the primary objection of the fisherfolk in Suba is that public participation was not adequately done for the community to understand the implication of this project. Secondly, the tenure of the concession remains unknown. And Mr. Speaker, we cannot tell whether the 216 acres of lake water have been granted perpetually or it is time-bound. Mr. Speaker, the county government of Homa Bay, that is supposed to be on the side of the fisherfolk, has maintained a studious silence. And they have only released a memorandum of understanding with the investor. And Mr. Speaker, the last meeting that was scheduled last week between the county government and the fisherfolk was called off at the last minute to the consternation of the fisherfolk. The contract and commercial terms have not been disclosed. The national government, in whose hands all fishery resources are vested, has not provided any clarity, but has chosen to send police officers to tear gas fishermen in their canoes. Mr. Speaker, in this conspiracy of silence, what will prevent the investor and his local partners from grabbing the entire lake? This is a state of uncertainty that the people of Suba cannot accept to live with. Mr. Speaker, you have served in this region in a previous life, and you know that the Abasuba and the fisherfolk of Lake Victoria fought many battles to assert their rights to those beaches and shores that they currently occupied. And Mr. Speaker, speaking on behalf of these fisherfolk, we are ready to fight to defend the beaches and shores from land grabbing or lake grabbing by cartels or neo-colonial agents. Mr. Speaker, this investment in Suba has also deprived local communities of traditional access to fishing grounds, which is against the provisions of Section 64 of the Fisheries Management and Development Act. This is the same scenario in many other ventures around Lake Victoria, where site suitability is poorly regulated, with most developments located within breeding grounds and traditional fishing grounds. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, the investment has blocked traditional transport routes to adjacent islands of Mfangano, Kibwogi, and Remba, which forces locals to use longer and more expensive routes. Mr. Speaker, the Cabinet Secretary is mandated to develop regulations for aquaculture. These regulations have not been brought before Parliament, and because fishery resources are vested in the state, the county government has no authority to allocate lakeland. In the absence of clear regulations, the concessions in Lake Victoria can easily be viewed as an illegal lake grab. Mr. Speaker, there should not be any doubt that we welcome innovation in the fisheries sector. Let it be known, and when I say this, I speak on behalf of the leaders from the region and of the fisherfolk. Let it be known that we accept that we cannot be hunters and gatherers in the lake forever. However, innovation should not come in the form of a land grab and oppression of the communities living around the lake. Mr. Speaker, all we want is clarity and proper guidelines to be put in place. Mr. Speaker, we want the Fisheries Management Act to be implemented, and that is a duty of the executive. It is not a favor. Mr. Speaker, we want the CS Agriculture to bring regulations to this House. Mr. Speaker, we want a meeting between the county government, the national government, the local community, and the investors, so that we can be assured that this is not another form of partitioning of the lake. Mr. Speaker, we want to know the size of the concession. Is it 315 acres? Is it 1,000 acres? We want to know the duration of the concession, Mr. Speaker. We want to know how much the investor has paid. We want to know how much the county has collected in taxes. We want to understand the benefits to the local community. And we want to ensure that there's a proper environmental impact assessment, Mr. Speaker. Because as we speak, there have even been increased cases of attack by wild animals, crocodiles and hippos, because they've been driven from their traditional breeding grounds. Mr. Speaker, I therefore implore this Senate to stand up for the rights of the fisherfolk in this country. I urge members to demand the full implementation of the Fisheries Management Act and to demand that the executive tables in this House the relevant regulations that will fire up this sector. Finally, I urge the House to resolve that no further concessions should be granted for large-scale commercial aquaculture in the lake until regulations are approved by this House. And Mr. Speaker, I am aware that the fisherfolk of Suba are planning to bring a petition to the House, even though I've advised them that it would be better to pass the petition to the County Assembly before it comes to the Senate. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Wetangula Moses.
Mr. Speaker, I want to make a very brief contribution to this statement. Something that the distinguished senator for Homa Bay has said that has struck my mind, that the government, either national or county, has given and leased away a part of the lake to a private investor. That's unimaginable, Mr. Speaker. Does it mean that that section of the lake, 200 acres, is a no-go zone for the locals? Mr. Speaker, this is an outrage. The government can regulate fishing in the lake. And under the law of the sea, Mr. Speaker, that also applies to inland mass water areas, you cannot demarcate water bodies for private gain. What you can do is to regulate how resources can be exploited. Mr. Speaker, the fishermen of Suba, Homa Bay, and around the lake, all the way to Sio in Busia County, have lived on the lake for their livelihood. There are some who go to the lake to fish for commercial reasons. There are some who go to the lake to fish for family livelihood. Pick a few pieces of fish for the family to eat on a day-to-day basis. For anybody to imagine, Mr. Speaker, that you can hive over part of the lake and hand over to an investor, and God forbid, I hope he's not a Chinese, and give them exclusive rights to the exclusion of local residents who are the custodians of this resource from time immemorial, is an assault on the dignity, sovereignty, and independence of our country. I want to urge, Mr. Speaker, whichever committee you are passing this matter to look at, because even if it's just a statement, the standing orders enjoin you with the authority to direct a particular committee to look at a statement of this nature and file a report to the House, because the interests of the people of the counties that we defend and represent are under threat. Mr. Speaker, finally, we also as a House need to look at the bill that the Senator has referred to, that we passed, that has been ascended to, but not operationalized. because we have maintained and subjected our fishermen to very rudimentary activities. Even simple construction of landing bays for hygiene, Mr. Speaker, is not being done. Fishing, Mr. Speaker, is a major, major undertaking to the extent that the country has mobilized itself to embrace and exploit the blue economy. The blue economy is not limited to the Indian Ocean. It covers the Lake Victoria, the Lake Naivasha, and all the inland water bodies, including Lake Turkana. So we need, Mr. Speaker, to have clarity of law, regulations, and management so that fishermen are not treated like strangers in their own areas where they have lived from time immemorial. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Cheriot Aaron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this chance. I want to register my support to my colleague, Senator Moses Kajwang, about this issue that is extremely important to the residents that he represents in this House. Mr. Speaker, I listened to him present the issues and the challenges that the people of this region continue to face, and you wonder whether the government considers them to be citizens of his country. I will go straight, Mr. Speaker, into what is a trend that is clearly emerging, and the new constitution hasn't been able to save us from it. It was envisioned, Mr. Speaker, that when we pass the 2010 constitution, we'll have a new police service and not a force anymore. But unfortunately, of the 3 men, including the gentleman who has been in office now for hardly 2 months, they all seem to have lost the plot and have no idea what the difference between a force and a service is. It was a dream of many Kenyans, Mr. Speaker, that for any particular time where there shall be a dispute between citizens and the state will always recognize that it belongs to the citizens, and therefore there is no way a servant can harass the owner. In other jurisdictions, Mr. Speaker, when you watch how citizens are treated, even when they are caught afoul of the law, you realize that these are countries that respect their citizens. Even when arresting a village drunk, they do it with dignity and honor. But nowadays, Mr. Speaker, and we have seen how petitions have been brought to this House the last 3 or 4 weeks, where we're being told even teachers, one of the most sacred professions, when they were being hauled out of their teaching classrooms, when some of them tried to reject this CBC training, you saw how they were being beaten up as if they are village idiots. This cannot be allowed to continue. It cannot be that despite the Constitution not having provided the process of recall.
What's your point of order?
Yes.
Order, Senator Wetangula.
Distinguished Senator for Kericho, whom I have so much respect for. Village idiot. Because even village idiots have rights.
I have back on record. That of no greater importance and respect. Senator Moses Kajwang, fisherman, perhaps for that in a lake. So how are you? So that they know they don't cross into private property. It is really astounding. And continue is, despite the fact that the Constitution doesn't provide vetted in this House, you can fire. And the time has come, Mr. Speaker, security that was brought to this House by the committee that
the Senate, and I saw the answers that police brutality, when asked about how police continue to harass citizens, I saw the things that Hillary Mutiambai needs to be reminded that have just addressed non-existent purposes. We need to call him back of the answers that he deposited. Be reminded, our police officers continue. Do not know of any other public who has been spoken of more than him in the last 2 or 3 months in this house, and all the ills that to meet on Kenyans, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, I want to urge you, much as of issue, fight for that of you to this house, so that we understand one life because there are 10 or 15 other people. So they ought not to have died who are in of our police officers. Therefore, to bring the IG to this house and question him. This particular officer that has been done about him. This house to put people to test, so that each and every time a police officer faces the citizen of this country, they know that there is a house here that can defend him. Recently passed the PPP law in this house. Live somewhere in the shelves of the National Assembly. And part of our recommendations that we made very strong arguments about, because I'm a member of the Finance Committee that went through all the proposed legislation made in that particular bill. Public participation is at the heart of any PPP project that is supposed to be carried out in any particular part of this country. The citizens must be able to have a say and say, we want this project or we do not. Did the PPP in this particular project? And if it wasn't done, then that is good basis also for somebody perhaps to go to law and have this contract declared null and void. This country belongs to the people of Kenya. Therefore, if I cannot be consulted, it doesn't matter how poor I am. I'm uneducated. So long as it is anything, an area that I call my home, that is a. It is not for the government to apply it, and when they do not want to apply it. Therefore, my sympathies with Senator Moses Kajwang and the tribulations that his people continue to face on this particular issue. But I urge you, my brother, for the sake of voter of yours that was killed in a way to have happened, please find ways of us getting the IG into the House of Parliament to answer and tell Kenyans have to die for police to stop the brutality. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Professor Ongeri.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To add my voice to a rather very sad. In my career, both as a politician and both as a student, the waterfronts are owned by individuals. It's a very, very strange situation. Even when you allocate plots, you can only allocate up to the of the waters. Beyond the yes, that's right. So you cannot allocate plots the territory of the waters. How an MOU can be just simply signed and assign state resources to an individual at the exclusion of all the people who stay there. I've seen nothing but walking to the lake, fishing out small fishes and big fishes for their daily meals, micro on the resources that have been God-given. To say the least, very disastrous. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, even if there was a commercial venture contemplated to be able to get the resources from Lake Victoria, and in this case with the Basuba people, who are also my people, it would have only been fair that a thorough public-private participation be carried out, people then share their ideas and agree on how these resources should be captured. This is indeed, Mr. Speaker, I put it to you, a case where the big is eating the small fish. Now, that's a true metaphor where the big fish has invaded the small fish to extinction. And I think it's a situation that this House can no longer tolerate or accept as valid. Why do I say so, Mr. Speaker? Because any resources that might body waters must be to the benefit of the local people, the county government, and also the national government of Kenya. In the same way we've done with the Petroleum and Mining Bill, which is now, I believe, an act of parliament, where we apportioned, where the resources of the minerals, underwater minerals, are being shared, exploited in a very sustainable manner. Because if you allow private sector to just go into the lake, they won't preserve the lake species of the fish that exist there. They will just carry hand and baggage, everything away and cut away the lake of all the fishes that will be required to be able to propagate the population of fishes for our consumption and for the sustainable around. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, my colleague, my neighbor, my brother, because they are brothers in Basubas, our brothers, it is a matter of urgency that they should be able now to bring that petition here and we prosecute it. And in your own ruling, Mr. Speaker, I urge you to be able to relegate it to a committee that can pick up this matter because it's urgent. I thank you for your indulgence.
Honorable Senators, I commit that petition to the Committee on Fisheries. Please do a thorough job. It's a weighty matter and report back to this House. I also like to acknowledge the presence in the public gallery this afternoon of visiting students and teachers from Gititu Secondary School, Murang'a County. In our usual tradition of receiving and welcoming visitors to Parliament, I extend a warm welcome to them, and on behalf of the Senate and on my own behalf, wish them a fruitful visit. I thank you. Senator Musuruve.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. And I also want to welcome the students of Gititu Secondary School into the House. And I want to say, Mr. Speaker, that these students in vain. Some of them here. So, Speaker, it is something very and the school authority for allowing the students to come and see what exactly happens, because what leadership really entails, and in seeing what you're doing and in hearing will help you when you're good leaders. Mr. Speaker, sir, now I go to my statement. Pursuant to Standing Order 48(1), I rise to seek a statement from the Standing Committee on Labor and Social Welfare concerning compliance to Article 54(2) of the Constitution on representation of persons with disabilities in elective and appointive bodies. In the statement, The committee should table a detailed report indicating how many members of the public living with disabilities have been hired, appointed, and promoted in the last 3 years, and explain of implementation that provides for progressive implementation of the principles of the public in elective and appointive bodies are persons with disabilities. And Mr. Speaker, even though Article 54(2) of the Constitution says that there's need to have disabilities in elective and appointive positions, it's still disability, and this is not really being defended strongly. An observation is that from employing persons with disabilities may be having papers, are lacking jobs. But Mr. Speaker, there's a way in which county governments can deliberately choose
You have made the request. The committee will now look at the issues. Thank you. Next order. Senator Milgo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. About the statement by Senator Musuruve on inclusion of persons with disabilities and bodies. Mr. Speaker, disabilities and in any case to perform like any other if they are given opportunity. I think persons with disabilities, Mr. Speaker, as women, Mr. Speaker, as you know that is shared to be. Mr. Speaker, sir, I think many times persons with disabilities are normally served because maybe they may not be able to do any physical work, but then given an opportunity, they have got the power to be able to contribute to the society. And if in this case, they would be able to support themselves, they are keen. Mr. Speaker, sir, there are many people who are PWDs who are just languishing at home. Some of them have gone to school in gainful employment. In addition to this, even in terms of issues of procurement, although it has been given through ACPO that women PWDs are supposed to be considered in terms of government procurement, in most cases we find that not only in the national government, even in the counties, these people are not considered, therefore leaving PWDs, in this case, languishing in poverty. And in that, in the counties, we do realize that that one is still a challenge, and I think we need serious consideration, Mr. Speaker, and so that come the future, even some gainful employment. Otherwise, I thank Senator Musuruve for really having a group of people like Senator Musuruve has done very well in the Senate. I'm sure many of them, if they have given such a chance, they would also be able to do well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I know, Senator Musuruve, you had another statement, but because of time, you will present it on Thursday because we have the time for.
Order number 8, the Mental Health Bills number 32 of 2018.
Senator Petronila Were is not here, so he's open to members who want to make a contribution. Senator Beth Mogo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir, for the opportunity for me to contribute to this bill and to support it, that it is opportune time that we look very seriously into the issues of mental health. Mr. I especially want emphasis on the issue of stigma, because in our country, mental health and many people will hide their family because they do not. Mental health is really an illness, and there's nothing. Mr. Speaker, sir, we know in many, especially the developed countries, mental health is taken. A few years ago, when I served as the WHO dedicated the whole world on mental health. That took place, especially in our countries. We have, as a people, as a government, to put a lot of knowledge about mental health. That we should not wait. In our countries, we wait until somebody goes with the taking off their clothes or running on the road, completely abnormal. That's when we acknowledge this person is suffering from mental health. And then not even look for proper help. I would recommend that unfortunately, when the Health Committee was looking at this bill, I was then out of the country attending to my husband, who had a bit of at the time. And I want to support strongly that we also join mental health psychologists, that people start looking to psychologists, not just for people who are mad or even psychiatrists, as we define madness ourselves, but people much earlier when one feels, or community feels, or family, especially family, that there is something maybe person. And if we join psychologists and psychiatrists to be part of mental health care. And I think that's why we are seeing a lot of the murders that we are experiencing in our country, in families, or suicide in community, because the person has gone to that stage. Depression is part of mental health, even like depression. And it should be checked long before it gets to the stages where we are. Therefore, I would like clearly us to urge, when we do this bill or recommend, Excellency has named a committee to look into what's causing all these deaths, murders, that the Ministry of Health and the public service ministry, whatever ministry, you look very strong. Why? What's causing the depression in our country? Why all these murders? And why women, especially women, are being killed? That's something
of how the society takes the value of women. And all those issues should be put into the context of mental health. And the health be improved, that one going there does not feel like it's a punishment. Right now we have Mathare Hospital, Mathare. And the way it's taken, when somebody, even family, they don't want to say their patient is in Mathare Hospital. I believe we could have, even in other hospitals, departments that to deal with mental health. So there's not only this stigmatized kind of hospital where the people will go suffering from mental health. So I would urge that the Senate, when we pass this bill, we also add which we feel will improve our country. Mental health will be looked at illness, not as if it's something to be people to be ashamed of. It is a health concern recognized world over, and our people. So I'm happy to see that Ministry of Education is involved in this bill as a way of communicating to the young people. I would like to also that we part of this information, not just in schools, but how it can get out there to the public. If it is the radio, newspapers, government efforts to really public domain a major issue, because it is very major. We see how many arrive, and just not been had before. I want to believe that mental health is playing a very big role in this. And drug addicts, drugs is part of mental health. Excess of mental health. And we should focus, the government, us as a country, Parliament, everybody, we focus strongly on mental health. And even the judiciary. I support strongly this bill.
Thank you, Senator Mugo. Senator Kajwang.
Mr. Speaker, allow me to support this bill, the amendment bill, and also allow me to laud the mover of the amendments, Senator Architect Sylvia Kasanga, for making this very timely intervention on matters that have been stigmatized and on matters that many people have not given the attention that it deserves. Mr. Speaker, the objective of this bill is to ensure that persons with mental illness receive the highest attainable standards of health in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution. And mental health, Mr. Speaker, we have in our mind this impression of insanity. We have in our mind an impression that is called in street lingo in Nairobi, mogoroki, that has even been used by opponents to hold public. Mr. Speaker, a lot of stigma has accompanied issues is admitted to that hospital. His right to political and economic rights and right to representation would mean that you can still run for public office even when you've been adjudged to be of an unsound mind. But I do believe that that is not the intention of this amendment bill. Mr. Speaker, another of this amendment bill is that persons with mental illnesses shall have the right of access for treatment from public or I am not certain whether the National Hospital Insurance Fund has expanded its scope of cover to mental illnesses. But I do know that the fund has attempted to be innovative, and they have expanded their scope of cover to areas including in vitro fertilization, cancer, and other congenital diseases. I do hope that they are taking note in the event expand to mental illness. This would be the right time for them to this amendment is enacted. And Mr. Speaker, there are two groups of people that have been discriminated against by medical insurance providers. Those are persons with mental illnesses and elderly persons in society. Mr. Speaker, you can pay your medical insurance premiums consistently for 40, 50 years. But then when you hit a certain age, medical insurance providers giving you the cold shoulder. Even though we are now asserting the rights of persons with mental illnesses, we must also assert the rights of elderly persons in society. I'm not saying that there is a similarity between elderly persons and persons with mental illnesses, but I'm just saying that they've been discriminated against for a long time by insurance providers. Further, Mr. Speaker, this bill attempts to define the obligations of county governments. That most of the hospitals in counties from level 2 to 3 have not put up dedicated units for care, for treatment, and for rehabilitation of persons with mental illnesses. Now, this then is going to make it mandatory for county governments and for county hospitals at all levels from level 2, 3, and 4 to set aside dedicated clinics to offer outpatient services for persons with mental illnesses. Mr. Speaker, again, the bill intends that county governments shall offer rehabilitation programs and shall also offer proactive health interventions at county level to deal with some of the underlying causes of mental illness. Mr. Speaker, there is travel in Western Kenya. But when you move Kisumu city, and then move to Maseno, there seems to be a very high density of persons with mental illnesses in that little. It could be attributed to the dominance of a herb called cannabis sativa, which is consumed in copious
What is it, Senator Sakaja?
Mr. Speaker, I hate to interrupt Senator Kajwang, who went to a good school. Mr. Speaker, and he's saying that the degree of insanity or mental health issues increases as you move towards Western, as you live. Is he saying, or is he saying there's a problem in Western? Can you just be clear, Mr. Speaker?
Is there anything out of order with that, Senator Sakaja?
Yes, because, Mr. Speaker, it will be discriminatory. Mr. Speaker, specify that a certain either community or particular issue
what
with
under,
respect, especially with respect to
under what standing
orders of common category.
Senator Watangula, what is it?
Responsibility on this floor. Distinguished Senator for Homa Bay, in order to attempt in a very cavalier way to profile the people of former Western region, province of this country, categorically, that as you move from Kisumu City, and as if to emphasize that Kisumu City is a city of sanity, mentioned Kisumu City 3 times. Then as you move towards Maseno, then Luanda, with mental instability increases. Mr. Speaker, a profile of the community of the Mlembe Nation that is totally unacceptable because, Mr. Speaker, we know that in this country, Every single marketplace has its own lunatics, or people with mental incapacities.
Are the numbers the same?
And Mr. Speaker, if Senator Kajwang wants his statement to stand and remain on the Hansard, he has to tell this House how many mental in Kisumu, at Maseno, as he progressively moves into Western. Thirdly, Mr. Speaker, what evidence he has? People of Rwanda consume or bang or injaka or umsala that degenerates them into mental illnesses.
I hope you have noticed, Senator Kajwang. Senator Wetangula is asking you to say when you carried order, Senator Cheruiyot.
In any case, just concluding, Mr. Speaker, in terms of semantics, Senator Kajwang said you will notice. Noticing is subjective. It is not after carrying out.
You cannot notice something that does not exist.
Yes, no,
so
but I'm saying
it cannot be subjective.
It will
you
be subjective.
You will notice something that exists.
Mr. Speaker, exactly my point. The fact that he's being asked to produce accurate figures does not feature in the place of argument, because he only said, I noticed that the number is more or the other. Another person will notice lesser numbers.
Senator Naomi Shionga.
Mr. Speaker.
Are you from Luanda?
That is why maybe I'm standing here. Mr. Speaker, it is very, in fact, I pity the statement, because I come from the region, Western region, and it's just ahead of Homa Bay. Why could the senator start with Homa Bay and then come alongside? Yeah, because he's just targeting one community. And we are the people who are being targeted. It is so sad, Mr. Speaker. Can you substantiate with the figures?
Very well.
Yes, because
so
stigmatization of the region.
Very well.
Yes.
Senator Kajwang, what sayest thou before I allow maybe one or two other interventions?
Mr. Speaker, I fully subscribe to the comments made by my colleague, Senator Commissioner Aaron Cheruiyot, that we have made mental illness such a stigmatized thing that I can stand here and say that Homa Bay is leading in HIV and AIDS in the country, and people will express concern. And when I mention another area leading in mental illness, it becomes a problem. Number two, Mr. Speaker, I also fully agree with the sentiments of my leader, Senator Moses Wetangula. He has put it very clearly that every marketplace has its own share of insane persons. I don't know whether this Senate qualifies to be a marketplace, but if it did, then we would say that we have our own fair share of the national percentage. Mr. Speaker, finally, I have made my observations on the basis of what is called anecdotal evidence, and that is based on observation and personal testimony. Probably there will need to be some testing to confirm the conclusions that I am making. However, Mr. Speaker, I absolutely mean no insult and harm to the residents of Luanda. It is a very lovely town, Mr. Speaker. I went through it last weekend. I noticed a few people who did not operate in the normal mode.
That's not what you said earlier on. Senator Kajwang, what you said is completely the opposite of what you are now trying to say. Senator Beth Mugo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. Could I, Mr. Speaker, is it in order when this bill is trying to destigmatize the mental health, and the colleagues here keep on saying lunatics, the distinguished member from Bugoma, insane, we can easily, we are the people to deliver, to stop stigmatizing and say mentally ill or mental ill or whatever is an illness like any other illness.
Senator Wetangula, you are now, you know, they say You are now the one being pursued. The hunter has become the hunted. What do you have to say?
Mr. Speaker, in Kiswahili they say, Bwagu kapata bwaguzi. The hunter becomes the hunted. Mr. Speaker, indeed, fully to what the distinguished Senator Beth Mugo is saying, that stigmatizing any situation in health is wrong. But Mr. Speaker, mental health, mental illness, derangement, lunacy, all these are English descriptions, are used at different times. And it depends on how you receive it. Because, Mr. Speaker, the word lunacy or a lunatic is not abusive. It is a description of a condition. But I agree with her fully that we should never live in denial. And when you listen to my contributions, if you give me an opportunity, you'll see how mercurial they will be on this matter, Mr. Speaker, because I am quite well versed on matters of mental health and how it is mishandled and how it has been turned into a political weapon in certain countries and how people have been locked up and even died in dungeons because they have been labeled mental patients.
Now, does that knowledge also allow you to dispute the number of mentally ill persons at Luanda Market?
Mr. Speaker, the issue was that the senator for Homa Bay, he didn't even insinuate, he said openly that there are more people with mental problems at Luanda because they consume cannabis sativa. He didn't give any evidence to this.
Very well, very well. Let's narrow down to the point. What is it, Senator Pogisho?
Mr. Speaker, I think while you're otherwise engaged, Senator Kajwang made a claim that he must substantiate, Mr. Speaker. He likened this house to a market to begin with, and went ahead to say that we have our fair share of the mental disability. Mr. Speaker, he nearly went on to say that our share is related to Luanda Market or vicinity thereof, and therefore, Mr. Speaker, you know that can easily point to a certain direction, a certain members here, and and so can he, Mr. Speaker, shed light on what he meant by likening this place to a market?
Now, I want to hear from Senator Pogisho and Senator Wetangula and Senator Beth Mugo whether it is your case that the words used by Senator Kajwang, the words in question, are exceptional words within the meaning of Standing Order 97, which require retraction or apology, or whether there are disputed facts which require substantiation. Withdraw. Substantiation, yes. Senator Sakaja, as the...
Mr. Speaker, I started this, or rather I raised this first.
Yes.
And I think it is not being taken with the seriousness it deserves. We have no problem with mental health, etc. It's something that we need to address. Mr. Speaker, I was speaking directly to Standing Order number 100, Mr. Speaker. When you say that a certain part of this country has a higher number of mentally ill patients and you directly attribute it to the consumption of bang, Mr. Speaker, that is an affront to the people, especially if you cannot provide the data to substantiate it, Mr. Speaker. That is profiling, and that is actually ethnic. It is not right, and we don't take it lightly. So, Mr. Speaker, according to Article 100 and Sub-Article 2, Standing Order 102, if the senator has sufficient reason to convince the Speaker that he is unable to substantiate it, he must withdraw it. It cannot go on the record that this House has said that in Luanda, there are more people mentally ill because the consumption of bang is higher in Western than in Nyanza. And even when Senator Cheriot came to say it's subjective, it is not subjective. And we remember that Senator Cheriot himself has been accused by the governor of Nairobi of partaking in the toilets of Parliament. So is he coming out as a support
Order.
group or as, you know, as a fellow consumer?
Order, Senator Sakaja. Now there are two issues here. And the two issues relate to Standing Order 97 and 100 respectively. Under Standing Order 97, I need to know whether Senator Kajwang has used exceptional words for which he requires to retract, or understanding on 100, if he has made certain statements which he claims to be factual, which he requires to provide the accuracy of those facts or otherwise substantiate them. So, and why I'm asking that is because Senator Beth Mugo also raised an issue about what Senator Wetangula said about the word lunatics. So you may as well, Senator Wetangula, address yourself in accordance with Standing Order 97, remove the log in your eye before you remove the speck in your
Mr. Speaker,
neighbor's
on
eye.
the use of the word lunatic, I agreed with Beth Mugo, and I said it's an English word that is variously used, but if she finds it too strong, I don't think it's offensive, but it's a strong word, we should expunge it from the Hansard. It adds no value. Mr. Speaker, when you challenge Senator Sakaja, my nephew, to tell you which standing order he was rising on, I quickly came to his defense that he was taking responsibility for the accuracy of what you say. Standing Order 100 that he has now quoted. And I thank you for also bringing into play Standing Order 97. In fact, the distinguished senator of Homa Bay has violated both standing orders. He has violated both standing orders to the extent that, Mr. Speaker, he cannot say that the people of Luanda have a higher density of mental patients because they smoke cannabis sativa. In fact, Mr. Speaker, there is no medical evidence that persons who consume cannabis sativa degenerate into mental patients. Mr. Speaker, we know great men and women of this world. Bob Marley was a known and confessed public consumer of cannabis sativa. He is a legend, Mr. Speaker. Barack Obama confessed to have tested it. Bill Clinton, the president of America, said he smoked, but he didn't inhale. Mr. Speaker, we have had Brenda Fassie, the late very distinguished artist from South Africa. She came here to entertain Kenyans, Mr. Speaker, and when she left, the police found tons and tons of half-smoked rolls of bang. And she was never disorderly, she was never found to have offended the law. So, Mr. Speaker, we cannot say that the people of Rwanda, first, there's no evidence that the people of Rwanda consume cannabis sativa. Or if they do, that they consume more than any other part of Kenya. And number two, there's no evidence that it leads to mental illness. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, Senator Kajwang must retract and withdraw the statement and apologize to the distinguished and honorable people of Rwanda and the Mlembe nation in general.
I think we should rest this matter. What is it, Senator Pogisio?
Mr. Speaker, I think it's good for Senator Kajwang, as he thinks of what to do, to refer also to Standing Order 96(3) on offensive language to this House. And I was particularly concerned that he would think we have a fair share of lunatics in the House here, Speaker. And that requires, Speaker, that would require the action of retracting and withdrawing, Mr. Speaker, and apologizing. And Mr. Speaker, the rest has been well spoken. Thank you very much.
Well done. I think, Senator Kajwang, your sins are being compounded by the day. You are better advised to just retract, apologize, and move on. Because now the new dimension brought under 96.3 convinces me that what you said could offend some people, unless you have the facts, which you must table. If you insist that what you said is factual, then you'll have to do what the standing orders say, which is to substantiate by tabling the evidence.
Mr. Speaker, I made it clear that this is anecdotal evidence, which is not empirical and not verifiable. And so I will not insist that the interpretation of the House is something that I must bring numbers to support. Mr. Speaker, on that basis,
yes.
Let it remain anecdotal and not verifiable and empirical.
But is it something you want to go on record?
Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to clarify and dissuade the House from taking the view that when you talk about Luanda, you are talking about the Mulembe nation.
Order, Senator. Order, Senator. That notwithstanding, do you stand by the statement you made about numbers of mentally ill people
Mr. Speaker,
at a place called Luanda?
Because I've not done a proper national analysis,
yes.
I withdraw the assertion
yes.
that the density of persons with mental illness is higher in Luanda than anywhere else. So I withdraw that, Mr. Speaker.
Very well.
Mr. Speaker, if you allow me, Luanda sits at the junction of Kakamega, of Siaya,
still
of
on their
Kisumu,
case,
of Nandi. Luanda sits at the junction of 6 counties. And so Luanda is a mini Kenya. So it should not be construed to represent only one community. Mr. Speaker, moving on, I have received some statistics from the mover of this amendment bill. The architect tells me that 1 out of every 4 Kenyans have recorded mental illness. This house represents the country. And you cannot expect this house not to represent those 1 out of 4 with mental illness. And those are recorded cases of mental illness. Mr. Speaker, if you look at unrecorded cases, the number could be higher. And so, Mr. Speaker, it's being a reflection of the nation, we must agree that each and every one of us at some point has recorded a case of mental illness. And Mr. Speaker, mental illness is not walking around naked. It is not the stigma that we have associated with it. Depression is mental illness. Mr. Speaker, even burnout has now been classified as a disease, as a mental...
Order, Senator. Please have your seat for a while. We need to recognize some visitors before they leave. Honorable Senators, I have a communication. I would like to acknowledge the presence in the public gallery this afternoon of visiting students and teachers from Cardinal Tunga Girls Secondary School, Bungoma County. In our usual tradition of receiving and welcoming visitors to Parliament, I extend a warm welcome to them, and on behalf of the Senate and on my own behalf, wish them a fruitful visit. Thank you. Maybe Senator Wetangula, because we interrupted Senator Kajwang's time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me a minute or two to join you in welcoming the students and teachers from Kadnotunga Girls Secondary School in Bungoma County. Kadnotunga Girls, Mr. Speaker, is a school that's very dear to me. After my high school, when I had a short vacation or academic interlude before going to the university, I taught at Kibabi High School and Kadnotunga Girls. And it's a school that is in my neighborhood, very close to my residence. It neighbors Kibabi University. And it's a school named after the great, eminent Maurice Cardinal Tunga, who is one of the most distinguished churchmen this country has ever produced, who never sat in any church to solicit for or receive huge donations on a daily basis for reasons nobody knows. He, Mr. Speaker, represents those who are on the highway to be saints. That includes Julius Kambarage Nyerere and others. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of my colleagues who may not have time to speak to this, the students of Karnotunga are welcome. This is the upper house of Parliament, the house of reason, the house of sound debate, as you may have noticed. And it's a house where we boisterously argue our points without becoming personal. And we look forward to you in your journey through academia to end up being members of this august house to represent the people of Kenya. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Very well. Thank you, Senator Wetangula. Very well. Senator Kajwang, please conclude your contribution.
Speaker, I intend to conclude without drawing further controversy, and just to remind everybody that at some point in time, we all go through phases of mental illness. Mr. Speaker, allow me to talk about some of the proximate causes of mental illness in this country. There could be natural causes. There could be pressures of work. But there could also be issues of drug abuse. Mr. Speaker, we have seen, particularly in the coastal belt, and I've personally gone to certain parts of the coast in Kenya, particularly Lamu and Mombasa, and we have seen the impact that drug abuse has had on the mental health of people. And Mr. Speaker, this bill asserts that county governments have got a responsibility to ensure that they take preventive measures to curb the proximate causes and the root causes of mental health in those counties. Finally, Mr. Speaker, one other very important amendment to the existing Health Act is that the Act on Judicial Power over Persons and Estates of Persons Suffering from Mental Disorder has now been repealed with and replaced with Care and Administration of Property of Persons with Mental Illness. And Mr. Speaker, this has been one avenue through which people who have worked their entire livelihoods to make certain property at the sunset of their lives, when sometimes their mental faculties are not as optimal as they ought to be. You will find people coming in, trying to take advantage of the situation. You will find families trying to take different angles to ensure that they succeed or that they inherit the wealth of people by declaring the father or the mother to be mentally incapable. And Mr. Speaker, I'm glad that this amendment has provided some description on how those cases should be handled, and handled in a humane manner, in a manner that continues to respect the rights and obligations and freedoms of the person who may be adjudged to be suffering from mental illness. Mr. Speaker, I self-confess that I have personally had mental illness in the form of depression. Every time we are going into elections, every other morning you wake up as a politician, you find people have lined up insults. People have been accused of being drug dealers or drug addicts in this house. People have been accused of doing business in Nairobi and not paying rates. All these are fake allegations, Mr. Speaker. When you wake up in the morning and you are faced with all this, you cannot blame yourself for suffering a bout of depression. Therefore, let us look at mental illness and mental health not as the extremities that we are used to, but the things that we go through in our day-to-day lives. Mr. Speaker, I support.
Finally, Senator Kajwang, congratulations on a successful completion of your contribution. Senator Alice Milgo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Indeed, issues of mental health can easily cause controversy. As Senator Kajwang has just said, sometimes under so much stress, somebody can easily be considered having some mental illness. I was just reading a few minutes ago, Mr. Speaker, that there are very many hustlers in this country. And in any case, somebody decided to come up and really abuse the hustlers, and I'm sure that one can easily also cause some kind of mental stress. Mr. Speaker, sir, I wish to really thank Senator Sylvia Kasanga for bringing such a special amendment, particularly at this point in time, because of the fact that in our country, we have realized there are very many issues related to mental health. Mr. Speaker, sir, according to Article 43(1)(a) of the Constitution, every person in this case should be guaranteed the right to highest attainable standards of health, which includes the right to the health care, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, sir, I think this bill is indeed very important, particularly so because it obligates the county government as well as the national government to actually address the issues of accessibility to mental health hospitals. And in any case, this will include issues of care, treatment, rehabilitation to the persons living with such problems, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think our country right now has got major problems in terms of mental illness because of a number of issues, Mr. Speaker, sir. And I think this bill has come at such a time as this to actually speak to this particular issue. Particularly, most people have been affected as a result of low awareness from the actual people concerned. Issues of stigma and even discrimination has actually caused this to even explode more. Mr. Speaker, sir, we are already having a lot of problems in our country in terms of soaring poverty and very many other social setbacks, Mr. Speaker, such as unemployment. As I'm speaking right now, Mr. Speaker, recently in my county, just in a radius of only 200 square kilometers, we had 4 youths committing suicide, and 2 of them left notes to the point that they are feeling that life is meaningless right now because they cannot find any gainful employment, Mr. Speaker. Another in this case also committed suicide because it could not cope with the stresses that were in school. Mr. Speaker, sir, we have realized that as a result of all these issues of poverty, other major social setbacks, we have had youths taking to drugs, Mr. Speaker, and eventually, as a result of addiction, they end up suffering from some kind of mental illness. Mr. Speaker, sir, I think this bill will go a long way in actually curing this issue, particularly in ensuring that rights of an individual are really taken care of, Mr. Speaker. We have noted that most of the people that are already affected right now are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorders, some depression, as one has already put, that most people are having some depression, except that the degree varies. Mr. Speaker, sir, even issues of substance abuse and other substances have actually caused mental illnesses, particularly in the youth, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, sir, in clause 4.2e, this bill shall actually speak to the issue of rights of a person with mental health. I think recently we got information from one Mr. William that was mentally ill and has been that is in Kisumu County and has been in the hospital for the last 22 years, Mr. Speaker, but then has never been seen by a psychiatrist for the last 1 year. Mr. Speaker, sir, this indeed is a point that to show that people with mental health are really suffering as a result of not actually being accorded their actual rights. Mr. Speaker, sir, in this bill, 2B, P, C, and D is very crucial because even recently in Kericho County, there was a boy who had gotten C+ and was really anticipating to get a very high, a higher grade. But then, as a result of that one, the boy in this case broke down. I'm sure if we had such mental health facilities, this boy in this case would have been saved, Mr. Speaker, and I think we would not have lost him. Would not have lost him to mental health, Mr. Speaker, or in this case, mental illness, which is now the case, particularly because of being locked in some dark room for many days without any care, Mr. Speaker. Part 1A of the bill, in this case, obligates the county to do a number of things, particularly because health now is a devolved issue. The county governments are obligated to start in levels 2, 3, and 4 health facilities. Some areas should be set aside and dedicated to clinics to offer outpatient services for persons with mental illness. And I think this will go a long way to actually ensure that for those cases that have not gone into extremities, what happens is that they can be saved. This has gone a long way in addition to ensure that the community, there'll be community-based organization care, Mr. Speaker, and I think this will include family programs, community programs, and I think when somebody is taken or rather cared for within their communities, this is even better. I think we've heard of cases where somebody has been taken to a mental health hospital, and even so, they have even ended up becoming even more ill because of the environment with which they are surrounded. I think this bill will go a long way in ensuring that there will be a standardized kind of treatment for all the mental cases in this country, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, I think clause 47 of this bill still goes a long way to actually clarify the action that should be taken against a person that is in charge of taking care of a mentally ill person, Mr. Speaker. I think for many years, we've learned that those people who are in charge of these mental health cases have actually abused them, they have treated them badly, and in any case, the same people, rather than getting healed or cured, have ended up even becoming sick, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, sir, I think this bill is quite important, and I think it deserves a lot of support and even more debate, because mental cases is actually very rampant. We have seen very many cases where an husband is rising up and killing the wife, or in this case, the wife killing the husband over very petty issues, Mr. Speaker. And if this one here is clearly investigated, we would realize that those are cases of mental health. Mr. Speaker, sir, I think this bill has come at the right time, and I wish to support this bill from Senator Kasanga. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir.
Thank you, Senator Professor Ongeri.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me the opportunity to contribute to this bill. First of all, I thank Architect Sylvia Mulwa for bringing this bill, because there is so much that is misunderstood on matters of health, particularly mental health. Mr. Speaker, if I had weighed in earlier during the debate, when the issues of argument were coming out, I would have simply told you this, that more than 75% of Kenyans suffer from depression. And depression need not be illness in itself, because it may be something that affects, for instance, your mood, may be something that affects your thinking, may be something that affects your behavior. And when you have all these three elements put together in a higher proportion, and then you can safely say somebody may be suffering from a mental illness. It does not mean the kind of illness that you want to ascribe the mental lunacy that you had called off earlier. That's not the kind of violent behavior we're talking about. It's only that there is temporary destabilization of the mood, of the behavior, and thinking of a person. Just imagine how many times you go through many mood behaviors. How many mood changes, rather? How many times do you experience certain queer behaviors either within your family or outside your family, or in a class, or in a group like this, or in a debate like this? There are many occasions that you go through these behavioral changes. And also, how many times do you change your thinking? When you want to do A, B, C, D, suddenly midway you change it. That does not mean that you are suffering from a catastrophic mental disease. Far from it. It's only that at that point in time, your mind may not be in a state of mind that you can be able to argue properly. When do these things become more expressive? Obviously, when you see a mental illness, is a warning, is a red sign to you that something greater or bigger is just about to happen. For instance, the depression may move into a much more depressive mood and much more different from another depression that we know of, which is temporary and reversible. When you move into a reversible level, then you may exhibit certain behaviors which are antisocial, which are unbecoming, which may require your temporary hospitalization. So once we understand the facts that cater or govern, and indeed, for instance, the anxieties that you go through, the eating disorders you may go through, and the addictive behavior, you are talking of cannabis sativa, it's just one of the psychotropic agents, one of the agents, not psychotropic, one of the agents, addictive agents that may lead to mood behavior changes. It's not something that you want to deal with at this stage and call it something as bizarre. No, far from it. Mr. Speaker, I wish we will appreciate that every one of us, without exception, in one way or the other, has gone through depression. Whether when you are being born, your parents went through depression. Anxiety, just a mere behavior, and anxiety waiting for a new arrival in the family. Or you are going through an examination episode, that's depression. When you come through it, you feel now you are liberated, and you celebrate. That's the mood change. The mood changes from one of depression to one of celebration because you have received good news or good results. Or when you go through the elections, you go through a certain mood. You are depressed, you are not quite sure whether you are passing through or you are winning the elections, but eventually you do so. What concerns me, Mr. Speaker, and this is why this bill is on the floor of this House, is how do we handle and relate to mental illness as a society, as a family, first of all, and as a society, and as a community, and as a nation. How do we handle mental illnesses when we deal with such people who may be unfortunate to be in the extreme end of the problem? It's important, therefore, that the institutions are put in place. This is why the first element that has been put in this bill is the ownership, domesticating this bill to be owned by the county governments, first of all by families, that the surroundings, the environments where these people are found should be an environment which is eco-friendly to them. Number two, how do the county governments assimilate and accept mental illnesses as part of those diseases that must be run by a health center, a dispensary health center, or for that matter, a sub-county hospitals? They must be educated to treat mental illnesses just like pneumonia, just like diarrhea, just like measles, or just like TB, or for that matter now the HIV/AIDS, which initially became a stigma to even pronounce the name that I'm HIV positive. And I remember I had a difficult time trying to educate Kenyans as a Minister for Health when I brought him the Know Your Status, HIV status, and I brought in a huge band from New York, the Kool and Gang, to be able to attract most of the Kenyans to accept that HIV/AIDS is with us. It is 14% of our population. We need to bring it down, and the only way you could bring it down is to accept the fact that 86% at that time were HIV negative. And therefore, you have to change that behavior, that mood, that mental makeup to accept that HIV/AIDS is with us and can be fought. Similarly, we now must change the mood of Kenyans to accept that depression is part of our way of life. And we just need to control it so that it doesn't go to the extreme. Kenyans must accept that they must go through certain stresses and strains. How many of us, when you woke up this morning, you have not gone through some level of testing or difficulties in one way or the other? Each one of us has his own issues and problems that you go through. And therefore, what this bill is trying to do is accepting this as a norm of society. That the only thing we need to do is to put benchmarks that can be able to define at what point this can become a disorderly illness. And I think that's why the county governments, you know, many people, when you say, I'm going to Mathare Hospital, nobody wants to hear that stigma. They think Mathare Hospital is for lunatics. It's not. That's a normal hospital treating people who have mood behaviors, people who have mental disorders in one form or the other. They cannot connect the thoughts together, point A and point B. They may lose their direction, and unfortunately, they fall foul of the drug peddlers, and therefore they become addictive to certain drugs, various forms of drugs. And that's why you find in our society today, and I said it in this house earlier on, I think 2 weeks ago, that one of the things we've got to watch, that the drug peddling in this country and the effects of drug are how many killings are there in society without any reasonable cause? Just simply somebody wakes up and tells his wife, you have not given him food, that's a cause for killing your wife? No way. That person is only that nobody had interest in detecting when this person was going through these milestones, from mild depression to schizophrenic level, and when they reach at that level, they also become violent. They become killers. This is why this bill is saying, hold on, can we now put benchmarks that will help us to identify these individuals in good time? So that once they are identified, then we can deal with a problem like any other normal illness, like pneumonia or diarrhea or TB or HIV/AIDS. It's a treatable condition. This is what I want to persuade this House to accept, that this is not a stigma problem. It's a problem of illness. In this case, it only involves the mind and the way the mind reacts to surroundings, the environments. And when we teach our medical students, we tell them, you approach this patient not with a distant look, but you approach them with a kind level. Now, I have something to say about our institutions. Unfortunately, our mental institutions, I'm talking about hospitals, do not offer the environment that is conducive to rapid healing. And we have not been able to use those who have been in those hospitals, have been healed, have gone out as people who can run a perfect mental hospital and encourage the other people who are mentally ill so that they can take them through the milestones they went through before they come out. Use volunteers, particularly those who have had a similar episode, who have been discharged from the hospital. They are the best volunteers to sit down with those patients in our mental institutions and walk them through the path they have walked through to success. And I think we need to incorporate this as part of the treatment, social engagement and social treatment, before you go to the actual drug treatment, psychotropic drugs that we use for the treatment of mental cases. It's important that we understand and appreciate this. I have seen one hospital in Kampala, in the outskirts of Kampala, a mental hospital. In fact, when you walk there, it's like a hospital, it's like a five-star hotel, where people just walk in for mental check. When you feel you are your mind is not stable, you walk in, you get checked. Like when you feel a cold, you walk into the doctor's plaza, you get checked. It's tonsillitis or it's a sore throat, you're given antibiotics. Similarly, mental illness must be treated in the same way. When individuals feel uncomfortable with their mental status, they should walk into a facility and be able to say, I'm not feeling well. They are diagnosed, they are treated, and they can walk home. But unfortunately, even we ourselves who are educated, even legislators like ourselves, when you hear of a mental illness, immediately you jump to a conclusion that this is a lunatic, you don't know what he will do for you. Therefore, unfortunately, they have been resigned to a very difficult positions that we must now bring them out of that pit. and make them look like human beings in the face of everybody. And you'll be surprised that when these people are successfully treated, they will be able. So what am I saying, Mr. Speaker? What I'm saying is that this bill, it is a county government bill, as it were, because all the medical cases have been decentralized and devolved to county governments. The county governments must be involved in whatever board, the mental health board that is set up at the top, so that they know the kind of issues they're going to handle. That's a very important point. You don't exclude them because they are the people who are going to effect the policies and the programs for mental health cases in their counties. That's point number one. Number two, you must have properly trained people who go through proper training, both the psychiatrists, the psychologists, the nurses, and the clinical officers who must also be properly trained, who can be able to handle these like any other normal nurse who handles these other medical cases that come to their health clinic. Number three, that the institutions that are set need not be separate from where the other patients are. It's just a ward. Of course, the doctors will be in a position to know who are the violent cases that have gone beyond repair that need now specialized attention in Mathare or other these institutions that have specialized equipment to be able to handle them. And sometimes the mental illness may be because of an underlying disease, and therefore they must go through normal checks and balances.
What is it, Senator Cheruiyot?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I do apologize to our senior Senator, Professor Ongeri, for disrupting him while making very informative arguments. But Mr. Speaker, did you notice that when Senator Irungu Kangata walked into the chamber, he used what I would consider to be an illegal entrance or route to get into the House? He came in, then there's that gap between the first chair. It's actually outside of the chamber, and walked in, especially now that we are discussing issues of mental health. If there is a senator who should listen to this discussion, it is Senator Irungu Kangata. Will you order him, Mr. Speaker, to use the correct route to get into the chamber so that he is properly seated using the proper channels, Mr. Speaker? Thank you.
Senator Murkomen.
The Speaker, on a further, I don't know if you can say further point of order on Senator Cheruiyot, Mr. Speaker. The Speaker, assuming that Senator Kangata could be suspected to have any mental related issues, Mr. Speaker, is it in order for Senator Cheruiyot, against the bill we are debating, Mr. Speaker, to try, Mr. Speaker, to ostracize, Mr. Speaker, and scare patients, Mr. Speaker, to look like, against what Professor said, Mr. Speaker, to look like mental health is a negative thing, Mr. Speaker, so that we don't look for help.
Order. 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 Before we get derailed. Before we get derailed, Senator Kangata, you know how to enter the chamber of parliament. Did you do the right thing, Senator Kangata? Order, you are not on record.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Allow me to say that I've always used that route. I've always thought it is the correct, it's part of way of passing. In fact, there are sergeant at arms there who sit there. They have never told me don't pass.
Order.
So I've always thought it's a legitimate.
Order. Order. You should have watched the senator for Nyandarua, who has just walked into this chamber. In fact, Senator Kangata, I have noticed you have a very carefree attitude, not just when you're entering this chamber, but inside this chamber, notwithstanding that you're a ranking member of the House as the deputy whip of the majority. So you need to up your game. Can you correct the situation now? And we leave that matter at that.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I did earlier on say a slight mood change can make you do bizarre things. That does not amount to mental illness. So this is what I really said, that every Kenyan, I think if anything else, Senator Kangata has reinforced the point I was trying to make, that in one state or other, every Kenyan is seized with a difficult problem that they may not be able to handle. And they find it too overwhelming at that material point. But now that this issue has been corrected, I think it's reinforced my point. So finally, what I was saying, Mr. Speaker, that the type of institutions we're going to set up for care of these people should not be categorized as specialized units themselves, although they may be set aside for such other patients who may appear to be violent and be treated as such. But I think they should be integrated where possible, and the extreme cases should have specialized places like the sanatoriums or the Mathare type, and change the character of Mathare, not where people are gone and beaten by canes or sorted out, but who are treated humanely. These are human beings, and you'll be surprised. More than 80% of people who go through this route will be normal. And therefore, they will be passed as normal. All that they need is support and care from us. So I'm in support of this bill at every aspect of it, from the amendments of certain elements in the Mental Act, which are not friendly to the mental people, the mental depressive cases, that should make them friendly, and also to the organization of the kind of authority or the board who should sit there, and also finally to the support, the kind of financial support they need at the county level, because that's where they're going to be resident, rather than referring people to Mathare Hospital. I support the bill, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Professor Ongeri. You have spoken like the professor of medicine you are. Let's hear from Senator Moses Wetangula. I hope we will speak like the lawyer you are.
Absolutely, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, thank you for an opportunity to support this bill. Mr. Speaker, hearing contributions from various members, I'm sure we all appreciate that the state of mental health in this country needs attention. Mr. Speaker, as we do so, this bill seeks to align the new constitution with the provisions of health care. In this country, Mr. Speaker, mental health has been stigmatized to the extent that even when you disagree in a simple argument with a friend, he'll tell you you're a candidate for Mathare, meaning that you're a mental patient. Mathare has been so stigmatized, Mr. Speaker, that going there, like Professor Ongeri says, people start thinking differently. But Mr. Speaker, I expected to hear from Professor Ongeri, who is a very distinguished academic and medical practitioner, the graduated levels of mental illness. A simple depression, Mr. Speaker, is definitely different from a person who wakes up in the morning, dressed very well, and all of a sudden strips naked and starts walking around, shouting obscenities and so on. You also have, Mr. Speaker, situations where people who have hitherto been regarded very highly in society wakes up in the morning and takes an axe and cuts off the head of his wife. Or a woman who gives, there was a case, Mr. Speaker, I did when I was in active legal practice. A man goes home in the evening and he had had a good meal with friends at a local market. The wife gives him food. He takes the food, gives to the family dog, and the wife takes an axe and cuts off his head and becomes a terrible homicide. Those are extreme cases, Mr. Speaker, of mental difficulties that many people go through. And I think Senator Kasanga, towards the end of the bill at committee stage, you probably will need some consultative process from people like Professor Ongeri to advise on how to deal with these graduated levels of mental illness. A depression or something that makes you feel sad temporarily for an hour or two, it cannot be treated in the same way as a situation where you wake up and wheel away family property without caring because you don't know what you are doing. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, even in law, we have the Magnotten rules that classify and define the levels of criminal responsibility depending on your mental state. Many people will get away with lesser responsibilities for crime given what their mental element would be. And this is a recognition that certain levels of depression or mental situations will make you suffer from what lawyers call diminished responsibility in the discharge of your activities. And Mr. Speaker, we should also disabuse of ourselves of the notion that people who smoke cannabis sativa automatically become mental. It is not necessarily true because I have some very good friends whom I know. For purposes of confidentiality, I can't mention their names, whom I know enjoy a puff of cannabis sativa. And they are very brilliant, very intelligent. They speak very intelligently. You never notice any depression in them, Mr. Speaker. And also, mental problems are caused by sometimes people who engage in excessive consumption of alcohol. Others who consume a lot of alcohol remain very normal. So, Mr. Speaker, this bill now brings us to the real issues, that mental health must be addressed in the context of the new Constitution and the devolved functions under the Constitution. When we look at the Schedule 4 structure, Mr. Speaker, the only non-mental health facility in the country, Mathare Mental Hospital, is classified as a national hospital, a referral hospital. So it is in the ambit of the national government. I hope that by the passage of this bill, counties will then be empowered with sufficient resources to have facilities alongside the existing normal hospitals that take care of mental health situations. Mr. Speaker, we should not mistake a situation where you feel low in the morning and you walk to Kenyatta Hospital to see a doctor and explain that I'm not feeling too well today, I feel like doing something unorthodox. That is different from the situation which we know, Mr. Speaker. When you go to villages, and because of families fearing the stigma, there are families that have locked away mental patients in houses and locked them and bolted. They are fed through the window. They are never let to see sunlight. When they come out, they are chained. Mr. Speaker, even in the Bible, and my distinguished colleague from Elgeyo Marakwet likes quoting the Bible. Even in the Bible, mental patients were chained and left in places that were bizarre. They were kept in same houses as with pigs, in pigsties. In fact, Mr. Speaker, you remember when Jesus exorcised demons from the Gerasene demoniac, he released them into pigs that then raced into the sea and drowned. Mr. Speaker, meaning that that is where they belonged.
Senator Wetangula, you seem to be doing very well of late in matters Bible.
Thank you, Mr.
Congratulations.
Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I want us to, as a House, to very carefully go through this bill because it's giving effect to constitutional provisions. But I also see, Mr. Speaker, that Senator Kasanga and the majority leader should look at this. When you say that mental patients can exercise full rights, particularly in politics, stand for positions of representation. How do you reconcile that with Article 99 and 137 of the Constitution that says very clearly that for you to qualify to run for Parliament, you must be of sound mind. And if you are of sound mind, then you are not a mental patient. And Mr. Speaker, then it goes on to say that for you to be president, you must qualify to run for Parliament, meaning you must also have sound mind. So that provision may be subject to challenge as being unconstitutional. Mr. Speaker, in this country, people who suffer from mental infirmity and mental problems have really, really suffered, Madam Speaker. If you go to markets, you see them sleeping, sharing shop verandas with dogs. They sleep in total squalor. Their families have completely forgotten them, Mr. Speaker. And there's a Tanzanian musician called Remy Ongala, Mr. Speaker, commonly called Surambaya, who sang a song asking, you go to a market and in Kiswahili says, kichaa, a person with serious mental difficulties, a woman mwenye kichaa, unapata ana mimba. Mr. Speaker, who has done this? And chances are that the people who do these bizarre things are not themselves mental patients. They're just weird characters in society that take advantage of people in difficulties. In fact, Mr. Speaker, Shakespeare said, the sophistication and civilization of a society is judged in a manner you handle and treat people with disabilities, people with mental difficulties, children, and in those days, of course, the equality between men and women was not as vibrant as it is, and how you treat your women. The way you treat those kind of people will explain how your society looks like. When you disregard them and treat them badly, that shows the level of the absence of civilization your society has. So we want, Mr. Speaker, to get to a situation where in this bill, Sylvia, you must obligate the county government to also roll out budgets that deal with cases of counseling, dealing with cases of depression, and in extreme cases, we must have at least an obligation in each county to have a hospital with a ward that will take care of mental patients. Of course, we must appreciate, Madam Speaker, that there are mental patients who suffer from mild depressions that can walk into hospital, sit with other patients, be treated, and go home. There are those who will go to hospital and even assault the doctors who are attending them. So we need to have a situation where all those particular extremes are dealt with. Because if we don't do that, Madam Speaker, we'll not be doing the right thing as intended by this bill. I would also want, Madam Speaker, to encourage Sylvia Kasanga that when it comes to reconstituting the board, the theater of healthcare in this country is in the counties. We should not overload all these boards with persons elected and appointed from the national government when the real people upon which we are going to administer this law are in the counties. So I would want to see that the board is top-heavy with the people from counties that can be able to argue cases of more resources, more personnel, and so on and so forth. The alternative, Madam Speaker, is going to be found in the bill that Senator is bringing that is dealing with the issue of KEMSA. But you can draw a parallel by saying that if we want to have people of this country treated properly, a person in Loyangalani, a person in Embobut, a person in Mount Elgon, a person in Vanga must be able to attend and get the same health care that everybody else gets in Nairobi. How do I achieve this, Madam Speaker? By obligating the two levels of government to cooperate and collaborate in resource sharing that is targeted towards people that suffer and require attention. Because, Madam Speaker, people who live in Nairobi, who live around the environs of Nairobi, today, if you feel depressed, you walk into Nairobi Hospital, you will be referred to a professional psychiatrist. If you go to Kenyatta, same thing. You go to Karen Hospital, same thing. You go to Mama Lucy, same thing. But Madam Speaker, if you live in Londiani, in my good friend's Cheriot's constituency, and you suffer from a mental problem, you walk into a dispensary and you are given a clinical officer who knows very little or nothing at all about mental illness to attend to you. So what do? They just strike you with tranquilizers to make you less active, to make you less violent if you are violent, and tell the family to carry you home. That is not solving a problem. So we need training. If it is true what we are being told, that by Professor Ongeri, that 75% of Kenyans suffer from one or other mental problem, which I think is a bit exaggerated. I don't think it is really true. Then the more reason why we need a lot of psychiatrists and counselors, psychological counselors, to advise people. Madam Speaker, this bill also speaks to ownership of property and disposal of property by mental patients. We have to be very careful, Madam Speaker, because when I agree that mental patients are human beings like all of us, and they must be allowed to enjoy all the freedoms, the rights within the Constitution. But we must be very careful, Madam Speaker. Recently, I don't know if we remember, there is a lawyer who was at the University of Nairobi ahead of me by 1 year, called Jane Njagi. Very distinguished lawyer. She became a bishop. And we saw stories in the papers that because she was undergoing severe depression to the extent that is being described here, she signed away her entire family property to a prophet. And the property went, Madam Speaker. So if you say that notwithstanding your mental status, you have the right to do such things, Madam Speaker, this lady has a son, she has a mother, she has sisters, and she has, through hypnosis, I believe, and depression, signed away her entire possession of prestigious properties in Lavington and other places to a prophet who doesn't care about the family as long as he's walking away with wealth. And this can happen over and over, Madam Speaker. That is why even when we go to court, you cannot write a valid will or attest to a valid will until you are proven to be of sound mind. Because you can find, Madam Speaker, people, there was another mzee, and the matter is in court, is contested very seriously. I don't want to go deep into it. But Mzee Kirima, one of the most hardworking self-made Kenyans, he left a multi-billion estate. But it's being contested that towards the end of his life, when he was in a severe depression, he was taken to a fraudulent lawyer and signed a will without knowing what he was signing, and willed away his estate, leaving away and disinheriting very critical members of his family. So, Madam Speaker, when we deal with matters, and the Constitution is very clear, when the Constitution talks of soundness of mind, the drafters of the Constitution were very, very clear in what they wanted to do. That I cannot wake up today and walk to Senator Cheriot and tell him, I'm assigning away all my land to you when I have sons and daughters and family that need to inherit. And a fraudulent receiver will never ask what will happen to your family. They simply take and take off. So, Madam Speaker, we must protect families so that is why we as lawyers, and my two colleagues here can attest to this, you can never walk to court and protect and defend a will unless you prove that at the time of signing, the person who willed had sound mind. Equally important, Madam Speaker, even when you take confessions to court, the courts will always ask, what was the frame of mind when the person signed this confession? You have been with the police, they have visited on you several untold activities, and then you end up saying, I would rather sign than continue suffering. That is not a voluntary statement. So depressions, whether we call it a depression, whether we call it madness, whether we call it lunacy, these are just semantics, Madam Speaker. The end game is people who temporarily or permanently lose the focus of their minds and do things that they ought not to do. First, they must be treated. And even when they are treated, we must ensure that after the treatment, they come back to their senses to be able to do things that affect their neighbors, their families, their everybody. And more importantly, Madam Speaker, we must avail as a matter of right, treatment to people who walk up and down markets, shouting from morning to evening, things that you don't understand. We see some out here who run to every car, Senator Bogesio, nipe 100. Senator Bogesio, nipe 200. Such fellows, Madam Speaker, are also mental patients, and the state has a duty to protect them and treat them. Lastly, Madam Speaker, when we talk of mental health, we must also be very careful. In some countries, Madam Speaker, especially former countries under the stranglehold of communism, anytime you disagree with the state, you are declared insane and taken to an asylum and locked up and jailed for years and years. You saw the other day, Madam Speaker, when there was a coup in Sudan, a general who had disagreed with the president and had been declared a mental patient 16 years ago. People thought he was even dead. He was picked from an asylum, from a general, a 5-star general, to a declared, in quotes, mental patient, locked up in an asylum, and comes out looking like he was an octogenarian, Madam Speaker. So we need also to make sure that the state does not abuse the process of mental illness to punish people. Because all you need to do is, the other day, Madam Speaker, I was listening to BBC, and some friendly country to Kenya declared 3 very senior politicians who had said that the country was going the wrong way. And they simply said, those are mental patients, lock them up. And they were locked up. And that is how it ends, Madam Speaker. So we need to protect the individual's rights. We need to have facilities available. And above all, we must protect the assets and properties of people who suffer from mental problems. I congratulate Sylvia Kasanga. I hope at the committee stage we'll look through this bill very carefully and make sure that the national government and the county governments work together for the betterment of the health of the people of this country. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Langat. Christopher Andrew.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for also giving me this opportunity to make my contribution on this particular very important bill on mental health. I want to congratulate Senator Kasanga for thinking so wisely about the same. This particular bill, Madam Speaker, provides an effective framework that supports awareness, treatment, prevention, and care, and even human rights for the people suffering from mental health diseases. I want to say that I'm so happy about the section that expounds on creating awareness. Awareness, I'm sure, includes enabling citizens to know that these particular people have a right to live, to be treated. They should not be taken, stigmatized, and be ashamed of. When you go to so many villages, you find that these people are associated with curses, superstition, and more often than not, they are taken for treatment in very crude ways by the magicians, witch doctors, and the rest. People have not get the awareness that it is a disease like any other, that a person can be taken to hospital and be treated, and they get assistance. This bill also has provided a strong linkage between the functions of the national government and the county government. And the highlighted region section on the fact that the hospitals that will be taking care of these particular people with mental health problems shall have some particular standards. Well, if you have visited these particular hospitals, once visited the Mathare and the Nakuru one, there is a great variation in terms of taking care of these people, the number of doctors available in those places, and the special nurses. I was also thinking that we should expand our medical training programs to include specific nurses that will be able to handle these people. So I want to say that it's a very important bill, especially also when it comes to getting the statistics right about these people so that we may not be operating on guesswork, as Senator Kachwang was saying, and I hope very well that I'm not among the four whom he insinuated that in this particular house being a marketplace, at least there are some four. It is my prayer that I'm not among them because, because people will not take me seriously. So I want to say that this bill also has provided a very well-defined section on the human rights, on the rights of these people. And I want to say that these people are always exploited. It takes me back to the village that I come from, and there are some people who are mentally challenged. And normally they are abused. They are always there to be used to split firewood, to do odd works, and so forth. So I think this bill will rescue such people from being exploited by people of our societies. And I want to say also that I'm also happy on the section that provides protection of the families with such patients, especially the properties. I've witnessed some families where these people are not even given their due share of property in the family. People share property, and normally they say, we shall use this to take care of him. And more often than not, they suffer, and they are not accorded their rights to property in their families. So I want to say that I support this particular very important bill, Madam Speaker, and I want to say that the amendments that they are in are very important, and all of us should really support it. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Zani Agnes Philomena.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I, from the onset, stand to support this bill. And we've really been looking forward to it coming up in the Senate. Senator Kasanga, congratulations. She also did a good job of alerting us and keeping us focused and interested about it. And it's very, very important because it addresses, I think, something we all face. Even as we struggle to be not one of the four that is mentioned in the statistics. And this statistics has been given actually in the policy itself. And this policy covers the period 2015 to 2030, and in it clearly articulates that 1 out of 4 suffer from mental disorders. The range of mental disorders, Madam Speaker, is so broad that depending on the levels and what the problem might be, even I think there's a problem in terms of even diagnosis, because some of these I think are mental illnesses that we read off the textbook rather than those that are even easy to identify. Some of them we can see a person and think that this person exhibits this type of mental disorder, but some of them are very, very not well known. They're not spoken about many times. And broadly, all these can easily be divided into 3 categories, more or less, and these have to do with one, anxiety disorders, and then we have the mood disorders, and then we have the schizophrenic disorders, and then we have some sort of different sort of personality disorders. And under anxiety disorders, for example, we have basic panic disorders. As a result of certain panic, you might panic and then you might overstretch, leading towards also depression. You could have anxiety disorders that come as a result of phobia. You might be scared of a particular thing. You might also have obsessive compulsive disorders and post-traumatic disorders, stress disorders. in the category of mood disorders that change your mood, make you act different. And a lot of this has to do also sometimes with the hormones and even the situation. Because mood can change. You can wake up in the morning very happy, and then in the afternoon something has happened. But all this is mental health. And sometimes we think that mental health is when you're removing your clothes and running in the streets, and therefore before that you don't need attention. You do need attention, and this bill proposes for both public and private facilities that allow you to just walk in and out and be assessed. And those people in those institutions need to know about all these various disorders and be able to trace them. It was just the other day on the floor of the House, we were talking about sickle cells from a motion from Senator Chironga. And that whole thing of diagnosis, and especially in our situation, we have also the problem of misdiagnosis. Because again, many diseases have more or less the same symptoms. You'll be told you have a depression, you have a headache, then this might suggest one thing or the other. But the mood disorders are very broad, and they include some very high levels of depression, for example. It could manifest itself as a bipolar disorder, so you have drastic opposite ways of reacting to things. It could be also persistent depressive disorder, which is a disorder of depression that is consistent and persistent, or even seasonal affective disorders, Madam Speaker. Under personality disorders, you find different ranges of this. You could have, for example, antisocial personality disorder, where people might just want to remain outside because of, again, levels of depression. You could have, again, paranoia coming in there. You could have stress response syndromes. You could have also disassociative, for example, disorders, which come as a result of something drastic that happens at a particular time and its impact remains with you. Some people have also factitious disorders, sexual and gender disorders, Madam Speaker, including paraphernalias, people who have a gender switch. They think they are men when they should be women, or vice versa, and they behave so. And then the social cultural context for understanding these disorders mainly is not in place, trying to get into the psychological psyche. Why is this person behaving like this? Why did they begin to be? Is this something to do with the way, the mutation, for example, of the cells when they were being born? So is it, for example, hereditary? Is it something to do with the brain? And all this becomes very, very complicated. In fact, one of the standard captions I was looking at is saying the cost of this treatment is very, very high. Somebody might need up to an average of about 20,000 for them to be treated. So unless national government and county government streamline and have a way to offer these services at affordable prices, then most of these, I think, are things that people just laugh at. You know, the first time when a boy child wore a wig, it could be just funny, but when it persists, then somebody somewhere maybe needed to pick about that a little bit earlier. In some cases, it might lead to other further probable diseases, even maybe into issues like dementia, into eczema's disease, and sometimes it's just according to sleep-related diseases. So it's very broad. So when the data talks about the 1 out of 4, then it is very broad, and that data also doesn't indicate whether, because most of these conditions sometimes are not fixed. Some of them change according to social and cultural conditions, changes, for example, to do with family stability or lack of it. Sometimes they're able to solve the problem within a particular framework or a particular situation and environment. So a lot of more sort of stringent approach needs to be put to really find out exactly what is happening. But the policy paper is very, very clear. And actually the basis for this legislation is part of the strategy of that policy paper, 2015-2030, from the Ministry of Health, that is very, very clear in its strategy, one, to develop a health plan, which is part of what this legislative agenda is going to bring out. Two, it was specifically to ensure that we come up with legislation, revised mental health legislation, which this particular bill is working to do very, very well, and also be able to operationalize the mental health bill and policies that are coming. Operationalization, therefore, means putting very distinct structures into place to ensure that all these issues are carried out. For example, at the national level, the issues of resources, therefore, comes in automatically. the issue of national strategy and policies, and breaking this down even to the level of, for example, the processes and guidelines for the private institutions that you've recommended in the bill, and not forgetting that even when those are put into place, it's very, very important that they run as per the policies and the guidelines that they have. You know, who brings in this person with a mental illness? How is that person taken in? You've put very stringent measures, for example, for ensuring that the institution is well vetted through the board, again, that you've put into place, and you've also gone a step further and amended sections of the membership of the board to bring in various professionals. I think that creates a forum where they can bring the various different solutions. That is very, very key and very, very important. In your penalty, where you say, for example, that if somebody does not follow the procedure, especially I think it's the part where you're talking about setting private institutions, and you set a penalty for no less than, for the corporate, you have for corporate and individual defaulters. And you say for the corporate defaulters, it should be no more than 10 million. There's a danger because on the lower side, it could be 1 million only, for example. So I think some sort of specification, because that is so serious, because somebody can actually just start a home and go and collect people in the rural area, put them there, use them as laborers. In your amendment bill, you've also indicated that that is illegal. Yeah, but somebody can do that, and they, you know, by the time they're paying 1 million penalty, they've already gained a lot of income from forcing them to do textile work, and therefore they've made profit anyway. So I think the lower end of the penalty, I think you need to make it a bit more stringent. And also when it comes to either or jail and fine, I think even that should be a little bit more, like almost like move towards an option of no fine in some instances, because sometimes the fine might be very easy. And then still at the national government, the standards in health facilities very clearly stipulated across the bill all through. Again, at the county level, various issues that are very, very key. Again, the issues of resources is key. Again, at the county level, the issue of rehabilitation programs and how to create rehabilitation programs that will be helpful, the issue of having county programs and following through those programs, the issue of target risk groups, identification of those groups and dealing with them in advance, the issue of well-sourced professionals, all this come out here. The issues of research data that keeps coming up over and over again, and very difficult area. And a lot of whether or not the numbers will really be able to be accurate will depend, again, on the level of diagnostics that take place. So again, and very important as well, even to disaggregate the different sort of mental illnesses and the various people in the various mental illnesses and the various facilities that they need and the sort of information and how they need to be progressed. So this part about the research data is very, very key. It would be interesting also just to know from discussion whether we already have some baseline data that we can deal with, for example, and what does that baseline data say? And also that step of even going to do further fact-finding, knowing that, for example, some people with severe mental illnesses tend to be even locked up and cannot be easily accessed. And then very key, again, the whole issue of sensitization programs. I think you've mentioned that, and I think that's very, very important as well, and very, very key. So all in all, at the end of the day, it's very, very important to put into place, of course, the whole issue of the mental health expenses and the need for the resources, not only human resources, but I mean, not only monetary resources and also human resources. In 20A, clause 20A, you call for a periodic review of mental health review, looking through to ensure that the care that is meant to be given and the nature of the illnesses can be reviewed from time to time. That is very key. And in part 12, you also bring in the issue of the care and administration of people with problems of mental illnesses in terms of inheritance and transition. So being able to give out property. And this is a category, most of the time in this matter, that is completely ignored. And I think one of the senators who spoke earlier clearly indicated that sometimes in some cases, you find that somebody is even giving their property away because maybe they were in a particular state deprivation, maybe depression, and it wasn't caught up with maybe moving towards mental illnesses. So all in all, it just all comes again to identifying whether, even in the medical colleges that people are being trained, are we churning out doctors, medical doctors? What percentage are we churning out? But what percentage are we, to what percentage are we churning out psychiatrists? To what level are we churning out psychologists, counselors? How are they well equipped? How are they able to be evaluated? How are they able to do their work over time and time again? The data from 2016 shows that that time there were only 88 psychiatrists in Kenya, and most of these were actually in urban areas. So again, the dichotomy of rural and urban comes in. Unfortunately, again, it transgresses across all other levels of inequalities, not only just economic inequalities, gender inequalities. You'll find probably more girls would suffer and would be more prone to abuse. Geographical inequalities come in. So all these are confounded and compounded by all this. But the bill is very clear in fighting for the rights of persons with mental illnesses at all levels. And this bill puts into place various very key structures to enable that process to be followed through. These public and private mental institutions that are being put into place are very critical in ensuring that these rights are adhered to. The bill appropriately amends various sections of the mental health bill that is already in place. In some places, deleting entire sections and adding other sections. But there's a flow to this bill. There's a very, very clear flow and very, very clear insight that is put into this bill in addressing the specific issues. And what are these specific issues? At the end of the day, what does it aim to do? It aims to promote mental health. And it has to be a discussion. And I think in certain countries, especially lately in the UK, with the Prince William and, for example, and Kate Middleton and Prince Harry picking up on this issue and talking about it, popularizing it, because they said that they almost felt that their own mental health was in problems at one time or the other, when specifically they went through very traumatic times in there. But being able to talk about it, be able to share, be able to come up with various groups to be able to articulate, this is very helpful. So this is a lot of work. It's one deliverable, but very, very big. Reduce mental illnesses, the whole issue of medicines, the whole issue of how they're taken care of, institutionalization comes in. But very key and important is the coordination for the prevention of mental illnesses, because that also has to be put in place. We can't watch the numbers go up without finding out what are the triggers, what are the points, or what are the variables that might create this. One of the variables, and we were discussing this a bit earlier, yes, I mean, there is a lot of work that shows there might be a correlation, for example, between taking marijuana and mental illness. That data is there. It could be anecdotal. It hasn't been put out clearly in terms of numbers, but that correlation is there. And saying that there's one person who took marijuana and they did not get mad is just using one subsample that might not give the actual picture. In fact, the data actually shows that there's a lot of mental illness that is related to alcohol and drug abuse. And the data also shows, and this is from WHO, they say that half of all mental illnesses actually start at 14 years. And this is the time the youth are experimenting, they want to drink, and some people really have just bad luck. There are some people who will drink and they'll get away with it, but there are some, because of their body makeup, you might go and drink with your peers, but you probably maybe have bipolar and you didn't know, or you take it and maybe your level of toleration is very, very low, and you find that you just get addicted immediately, and then the next thing is that you can't do well in school, then it comes up with depression, and when it has all these other components of other types of, so actually you might get to a point where you have just not one type of mental illness, but several types of mental illness manifesting in different way and at different times. Some people even say sometimes it can be a function of weather, you know, where it's very cold, the winter times, then more people get depressed and sometimes leading to mental illnesses. So reducing the impact of this is a whole big chunk again. Promoting recovery from people with mental illnesses is very, very key. And then last and not least, but not least, protecting their rights. And very clearly, even according to Article 47, that gives the right for health care for all, very, very clearly that you should not be discriminated against because you have a health illness, that you still have a part to play. In fact, if anything, you're going to have better and harmonious relationships by addressing the issue and finding a way of harmonious collaboration, harmonious living, rather than ignoring it altogether. And more now in Kenya, we are seeing this. We're seeing a lot of conflict, could be as a result of economic hard times, but also social and cultural relationships that are leading to killings that we never saw before, children being hacked by their parents, partners hacking and killing each other. So again, the level of the severity of both social, cultural, psychological, mental factors might lead into this. And this is really a discussion that people should be able to bring to the table very, very comfortably and be able to very, very comfortably talk about it. This policy, 2015 to 2030, an evaluation again of that same policy needs to be done to make sure that the gaps are properly addressed in the strategy and the legislation. And I think that is also a component of this bill that you've already put into place in addressing. The other parts of this bill to do with the board and the composition of the board and the responsibility of the boards, those are quite standard in terms of their presentation and what is expected of them. I think the conversation needs to begin, one, by accepting that there's a problem. There is no way we're going to be able to address this issue without accepting, with running around and thinking that, you know, this is for other people, it is not for the other one, it is not for me. It really starts with just a clear conversation. And that conversation needs to go even to the family level for parents to begin, because if that age of 14 is actually the starting point, then a lot of youth probably start very early, but parents don't get to know until much later. So having programs, counseling, peer group processes that help them to understand what role are they meant to play within societies and within communities. In the African traditional society, and this is what is always amazing, I always go back to African traditional society, and you look at the level of mental illness, for example, doesn't seem to have manifested, at least in terms of action, at least not very, very highly. If you look at the cohesion, men knew what their roles were, and there was a way society allowed them to move on with their ego. They were going to hunt, they would bring the food, and the women had specific roles. And all this has changed drastically. And with that change, it has created probably new dynamic ways of handling issues. The great aunties and grandfathers and mothers who were there at that time who would come and advise are no longer there. So again, do people have the space to talk? Do people have the space to be open? Do people have a way to talk about their issues without being judged? Do these young people have a place to go to? If the counseling is very expensive, then they will just stay away from the counseling. In fact, many people tend to confound the situation more, because now when they get depressed or when they have mental illness, what they do is they actually now drink some more. Madam Speaker, my time is up. I support. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Pokisho Samuel Losuron.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I would like to, from the onset, support the bill, the amendment to this bill, and to thank Madam Speaker, Senator Kasanga, for a job well done in putting this together. Madam Speaker, we have also, let me also use this opportunity to congratulate Senator Zani and for her being the other day awarded a state award, whatever it was, state honor, and many other senators who got it, congratulations. And although we also are in a state of shock because one of us has been attacked and is in hospital, we really have a situation in our hands. But let me go ahead and add my voice to the support of this very, very important bill on mental health. Madam Speaker, let's agree that we do not understand mental health. From that premise, we will then be able to help in these situations. That we as a nation do not understand mental health, that what we are up to is that we're used to people being expelled from homes and a burden being left to families to deal with their own family members. We don't have really a collective position that we do not understand mental health and that we need as leaders, first of all, to own that and to move ahead and even do a seminar on mental health so we understand what mental health is about, or mental illness for that matter. Madam Speaker, if today there was a situation where we had to do an alcohol blood test, people would run away. Some people don't want to be known. But it would be worse if there was a mental illness test. Madam Speaker, I think people would not even show up if we had a voluntary mental illness test. Why? Because we do not understand mental illness. Mental illness is complicated. Mental illness is, in African context, Madam Speaker, is attributed to beyond just medical explanations. The way we explain it away is that the person has been cast, or the person is under a spell, or the person is paying for their sins, or things like that. But Speaker, we have to come to grips with this situation, and we need to agree that we want to change that situation. We want to treat mental illness like any. That's why, Mr. Speaker, in this country, there are very few mental hospitals. And why do we not have mental treatment within our ordinary hospitals? It's because of the way we think of mental health, mental illness. That's why if you are from West Pokot and you have a problem with mental health, you have to be brought all the way to Madari Hospital. It's also because of that we have not trained enough doctors, that we don't have enough psychologists, we don't have enough psychiatrists, we don't have enough counselors in this country. It's for the same reason that we don't put emphasis on solving the issue of mental illness. Madam Speaker, this bill is an amendment to an existing bill, and to an act of parliament. And Madam Speaker, that act of parliament has been in existence for a while. But an amendment is simply renewing some words, changing a few things here and there. But it's because we do not take our laws very seriously, Madam Speaker. This law has been in existence, but we have not even dealt with it, handled it, used it properly to the place where we would have solved this matter. But Speaker, we went ahead and devolved health. And there is no county, if any, there must be very few, who are ready for mental illness in their counties. There are not very many counties with that. That means we devolved something without actually putting so much thought about it. What do you do in a county, given the budgets of that county? Where would they have employed specialists in mental health when they cannot even afford to hire the nurses for just everyday treatment of our patients? So, Madam Speaker, while I agree that this is good for amendment, I also hope that we can say, when we had the law in existence, we did not even utilize that law properly. And now amendments are going to, it can be there, we can dress it up properly, but are we ready to execute this? And Speaker, the three things that I like to say today is that we must just learn that to care for a person who is mentally ill requires special facilitations to the families. It requires early identification. And Madam Speaker, we don't have that. We don't have that. It's just like the way we are trying to say we are going to a system of education that is going to be personalized to every child. And yet we don't have the capacity to do it. We will struggle, but we don't have enough teachers to pay attention to a particular class of 100. And so, but anyway, we say we are going to do it because we want to do it. But here is a situation where you actually require to care for the person individually. People with mental illness cannot be lumped together for one care. It is individualized care because the situations are different. And so I would like to say that we need to, first of all, agree, Madam Speaker, that we must develop systems and institutions for care of those who are already sick. But we must go beyond that and identify those who are in line, those who already show symptoms. And there are many ways of telling that and helping those within the family, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this bill tries to cover all that. It may not cover everything, but it tries to take care of that. Now, the other thing, of course, is treatment, Madam Speaker. The treatment of patients has always been a burden to the families. And unless we get out of the situation where we think mental illness is a curse or it's a spell, or we think it is some kind of a reason of heredity or something, we cannot then treat the person properly. Madam Speaker, mental illness is part of the physical body, and that must be dealt with. And so I'm hoping that our hospitals, including the national referral hospitals as well as the county referral hospitals, can begin to address the issue of treatment, including employing people, specialists, and people who begin to identify. Since we have agreed, Madam Speaker, that every market has its mentally ill people, since that is an agreement, it means that we already have ready patients. It means we must then move to treat these patients. And Madam Speaker, some of the facilities provided and some of the ideas given for treatment, Madam Speaker, can be more destructive than helpful. In order to literally get rid of this person or to quickly get away from dealing with this problem, a lot of patients are sedated. And Madam Speaker, a lot of people are sedated and allowed just to sleep. Others are tied down and they cannot get out. But treatment must be humane. And so I hope, Madam Speaker, through this bill, that we can correct that. The other one, of course, is rehabilitation. I've spoken about that. Let's fight the stigma that is holding very tightly to us, that this is not a normal thing. This is something that we need to worry about. Madam Speaker, I know that I just wanted to summarize by saying the national curriculum in our training of the MTCs, from the level of MTCs all the way to medical school, should include mental health as a course or at least some units so that everybody is aware of that. And leaders must be brought to understand issues of mental health. I want to support it and ask my colleagues to support this so that we can go ahead and have a proper mechanism for treating those who are mentally ill. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Cheruiyot, Aaron Kipkurui.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for giving me this chance to also make my contribution to what is a very topical issue, something extremely important. In the month of May, worldwide, Madam Speaker, we celebrated the World Mental Health Month. And from the onset, Madam Speaker, I want to celebrate our colleague, Senator Sylvia Kasanga, who has run this campaign on mental health awareness issues and ensuring that all members, I don't think there's a bill that members of Senate have been as properly prepared about than this particular one. And I think that explains the level of interest that you have seen. From 4 o'clock, senator after the other have been speaking about this particular bill and sharing insights. Many of those insights, Madam Speaker, have been gotten from information shared by Senator Sylvia Kasanga. You give great honor to the office of senator. And you know, I wish many of us as colleagues, we can learn from you that as a leader or as a member of parliament, when you're passionate about a particular cause, make it your duty to educate and ensure that your colleagues also share and breathe life to the same passion. And this is a good week, Madam Speaker, especially for the women legislators in this House. Today, again, one of our colleagues, and I can see she's here, Senator Canon Naomi, was featured so prominently today in one of the local leading newspapers on a bill that she's bringing to this House. That tells you that the women in this House are doing extremely well, and they are taking their time to ensure that they change the lives of the people of this country. I celebrate them, Madam Speaker. And it gives it gives it away that the only man left in the House actually this afternoon is none other than the leading defender of women, and of course the women of the House. All the senators present are the women senators, including the Speaker, Madam Speaker. It's a lesson for us to learn as the men of this House, that perhaps we may need to take our work a bit more serious. Anyway, Madam Speaker, back to this bill. There are very interesting things that I have learned, first of all, by listening to the things that our colleagues have said. We have also taken time to educate ourselves, because it's clear, even just from the introduction, the banters that we had on, that we clearly, and I think Senator Pogisha has captured it well, do not understand the magnitude of this problem and what it is about. What is mental health? What is it that can pass for someone being said they are mentally sound and they are fully okay? From the things that we kept on, about what is lunacy, what is mental health, who is okay, who is not okay, to the very shocking statistics that were given by Senator Professor Ongeri on the various challenges that people continue to face in terms of their mental health. Therefore, this particular bill couldn't have come at a better time, especially in this country, where we are continuing to read week after the other of people that are doing things which ordinarily look like runaway crime, or people are just being inhumane with each other. But the true aspect, or the true problem, if we are to check more keenly, Madam Speaker, you will realize that it is actually a challenge of mental health. In many of our workspaces, the things that people sometimes say to each other, and even you do not need, Madam Speaker, to check any other place to confirm that the statistics that Senator Professor Ongeri was sharing are true. Just log on to many of our social media channels, Madam Speaker, and you see the kind of nasty things that people say to each other. There is no way that a normal person can wake up and out of the blues just choose to insult somebody they have never met, they do not know, they don't know their life story, but just because on account of maybe holding a divergent of opinion on issues of religion, race, political affiliation, football club that they support, people say very nasty things to each other. That confirms to you the statistics that Senator Professor Ongeri was sharing with us, that it can be even up to 75% that people are depressed, people have all signs and forms of disorder. As part, Madam Speaker, of the Mental Health Month, BBC did a documentary. You know how football is a popular sport, Madam Speaker. And they went out and spoke to leading football stars, people that have played at the very highest level of football. And these are people who are speaking about their experiences and their battles with mental health. And when they spoke, you realize that you couldn't tell. On many occasions, these are people we've gone to stadiums and cheered, we've sat down in our homes or in the places where we watch soccer, Madam Speaker, said very nasty things about them. But just the realization that a particular footballer shares.
Order, Senators. Honorable Senators, it's now 6:30. Time to adjourn the House. Senator Jeriot, you will have a balance of 15 minutes during the next sitting. Honorable Senators, tomorrow, Wednesday has been gazetted. Wednesday, 5th June 2019 has been gazetted. It's a public holiday, Eid al-Fitr, and I want to wish our Muslim colleagues a happy Eid. The Senate, therefore, stands adjourned until Thursday, the 6th June 2019 at 2:30 p.m.